She was a satisfat CEO worth satisf $100 million. He was the maintenance worker who fixed her office lights. When Victoria Hayes desperately needed a fake boyfriend to fool her parents, she never imagined she'd fall in love with the one man the whole world overlooked. But Ryan Walker had a secret weapon nobody expected, a 6-year-old daughter who would change everything. If you want to see how one lie built the most beautiful family you've ever seen, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. The fluorescent light in the third-floor bathroom had been flickering for 6 days before anyone bothered to submit a work order. Ryan Walker knew this because he'd noticed it himself on Monday, mentioned it to the facilities coordinator on Tuesday, watched the coordinator forget about it on Wednesday, and finally just wrote up the ticket himself on Thursday afternoon because the stuttering buzz was giving him a headache every time he restocked the paper towel dispensers. That was the thing about being a maintenance worker inside Grayson Tower, one of the tallest corporate buildings in downtown Denver. Nobody noticed the problems until they became unbearable, and nobody noticed the guy who fixed them at all. Ryan stood on the second rung of a stepladder, unscrewing the plastic cover of the fluorescent fixture while the bathroom door swung open behind him. A man in a charcoal suit walked in, glanced at Ryan for half a second the way someone might glance at a piece of furniture, and disappeared into a stall without a word. No hello, no nod. Not even that awkward little smile people gave each other in elevators. Ryan didn't take it personally. He'd stopped taking it personally about 2 years ago. He was 32 years old, 6'1", and built like someone who'd spent his 20s doing physical labor instead of sitting behind a desk. His hands were rough. His brown hair was always a little too long because he kept forgetting to schedule a haircut until Chloe reminded him, and even then he usually just trimmed it himself with kitchen scissors while she sat on the bathroom counter offering unsolicited advice. He had a quiet face, the kind of face people looked right through in crowds. Not ugly, not handsome enough to stop anyone in their tracks, just forgettable. And he'd made peace with that, mostly. The fluorescent tube slid out of its housing with a faint click. Ryan held it carefully, stepped down from the ladder, and set the dead tube inside his cart. He pulled a fresh one from the bottom shelf, checked the wattage printed on the end, because the last time he'd grabbed the wrong one, the coordinator had sent him a passive-aggressive email with the subject line, "RE, correct bulbs, please," and climbed back up. The new tube clicked into place, the light hummed to life, steady and clean. "There you go," Ryan muttered to nobody in particular. He packed up his cart and wheeled it into the hallway, the rubber wheels squeaking softly against the polished tile floor. Grayson Tower was a 44-story monument to corporate ambition, all glass and steel and imported marble in the lobby. The kind of building where the elevators played soft jazz and the reception desk always had fresh flowers that cost more per week than Ryan's grocery budget for a month. He'd worked here for 3 years. He knew every supply closet, every thermostat quirk, every elevator that ran slightly slower than the others. He knew which floor managers were polite and which ones treated him like he was part of the wallpaper. Most of them treated him like wallpaper. His radio crackled. "Walker, you done with 3? "Just finished." "Good. We got a request on 27, conference room B. Something's wrong with the projector mount again." Ryan sighed. Conference room B on 27. That was executive territory. The floor where the air smelled different, like expensive cologne and fresh printed money, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about whether your checking account could survive an unexpected car repair. "On my way," he said. He took the service elevator, which was slower and smaller and smelled faintly of cleaning solution. The regular elevators were technically available to all employees, but Ryan had learned early on that stepping into a car full of executives in Italian suits while pushing a maintenance cart created a specific kind of silence. Not hostile, exactly, but uncomfortable enough that he'd rather just take the long way around. The service elevator opened on 27 with a reluctant groan. Ryan pulled his cart into the back hallway and navigated the corridors he knew by heart. Left past the server room, right at the second fire extinguisher, through the door marked Authorized Personnel Only, that opened into the main executive wing. Conference room B was empty when he arrived, which was ideal. Working in occupied rooms meant dodging people's legs, apologizing for existing, and listening to conversations he had no business hearing. He preferred the quiet. The projector mount was loose again, same problem as last month. The bolt that anchored it to the ceiling bracket had been stripped from repeated adjustments. Someone on the AV team kept cranking it too tight, and now the threads were shot. Ryan dug through his toolbox, found a slightly larger bolt that would hold, and spent the next 20 minutes fixing a problem that should have been solved permanently if anyone had listened to his suggestion about replacing the whole bracket 6 months ago. Nobody had listened, obviously. He finished, tested the mount by gently pressing on it from different angles, and was packing up his tools when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, already knowing who it was before he looked at the screen. A text from Chloe's after-school program coordinator. "Hi, Mr. Walker. Just a reminder that pickup is at 5:30 today. Chloe says she made you a surprise, so prepare yourself." Kate. Ryan smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd worn all day, and it transformed his face completely, softened the tired lines around his eyes, brought out the dimple in his left cheek that Chloe always poked with her finger because she thought it was hilarious. He typed back, "Tell her I'm very scared. On my way soon." The clock on his phone read 4:47. His shift technically ended at 5, but he still had to return his cart to the supply room on the basement level, log his completed work orders, and change out of his uniform before driving across town to pick up Chloe. If traffic cooperated, which it almost never did on a Thursday, he'd make it with maybe 3 minutes to spare. He didn't have the luxury of running late. The after-school program charged $15 for every 10 minutes past the pickup window, and $15 was the difference between buying Chloe the good strawberries she liked or the ones that went mushy after 2 days. Ryan moved faster, down the back hallway, into the service elevator, basement level. He practically jogged through the supply room, checked in his cart, logged the 3 work orders he'd completed that afternoon, and ducked into the small employee locker room that smelled like industrial soap and someone's forgotten gym bag. He changed quickly, off with the gray maintenance uniform, on with jeans and a flannel shirt that had a small hole near the left cuff that he kept meaning to sew up. He caught a glimpse of himself in the scratched mirror above the sink. Tired. He looked tired. Not the dramatic movie star kind of tired where you still somehow looked attractive. The real kind. The kind where your body was telling you it needed more than 5 hours of sleep and your face was the messenger. He splashed water on his face, ran his fingers through his hair, and headed for the employee parking garage. His truck was a 2009 Ford F-150, dark blue, with a dent in the rear fender from a parking lot incident he'd never bothered to fix because the estimate was $400, and that was $400 he didn't have. The engine turned over on the second try. It always needed 2 tries now, and he pulled out of the garage into the golden afternoon light of a Denver Thursday in early October. Traffic was, predictably, terrible. Ryan sat in the slow crawl on I-25, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, watching the clock on the dashboard tick closer to 5:30 with the kind of quiet anxiety that had become background noise in his life. Not panic, just the constant low hum of cutting it close, of having zero margin for error, of knowing that one traffic accident or one flat tire could cascade into a chain of small disasters that he couldn't afford. He made it to Bright Future's after-school program at 5:26, 4 minutes to spare. A personal best for a Thursday. Chloe was waiting by the door, her backpack hanging off one shoulder, her blonde hair escaping from the braids he'd carefully done that morning. She had his eyes, brown, wide-set, always looking at the world like it was slightly more interesting than everyone else seemed to think. She was 6 years old and already had opinions about everything. Strong opinions. The kind of opinions that started with, "Actually, Dad," and ended with Ryan realizing he was losing an argument to a first grader. "Dad!" She launched herself at him with the full-body enthusiasm that only small children and golden retrievers could manage. He caught her, swung her up onto his hip. She was getting heavy, almost too big for this, but neither of them was ready to admit that yet, and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Hey, Bug. How was your day?" "Amazing. I made you something." "I heard. The surprise. Should I be scared?" "Very scared." She dug into her backpack with the intensity of a surgeon searching for a critical instrument and produced a piece of construction paper folded in half. She handed it to him with both hands, her expression deadly serious. Ryan opened it. Inside was a drawing done in marker. Their apartment building, recognizable by the crooked fire escape Chloe always included, with two stick figures standing in front of it. One tall, one small, both smiling. Above them, in wobbly capital letters, it said, "Best dad in the whole world." Whole, Chloe corrected herself before he could say anything. Ms. Patterson told me after. W-H-O-L-E. I already knew that. I just forgot. It's perfect, Ryan said, and his voice came out thicker than he intended. He cleared his throat. This is going on the fridge. Prime real estate. Obviously. He buckled her into her booster seat, handed her the granola bar he'd stashed in the glove box for exactly this purpose, and pulled back into traffic. The drive home was 22 minutes if he took the side streets, and Chloe filled every one of those minutes with a detailed account of her day that covered, in no particular order, the class hamster's suspicious weight gain, a disagreement with a boy named Marcus about whether ghosts were real, and her firm belief that her teacher was secretly a witch because she always knew when someone wasn't paying attention. Ryan listened to all of it. He asked follow-up questions. He agreed that the hamster situation warranted further investigation and that Marcus was probably wrong about ghosts but deserved the benefit of the doubt. This was the best part of his day. Every day. The 22 minutes in the truck with Chloe talking at full speed about things that mattered enormously to her, and therefore mattered enormously to him. Their apartment was on the second floor of a building in Capitol Hill that had been renovated in a way that mostly meant the landlord had painted over the old problems instead of fixing them. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a stove that had 1 burner that didn't work, and a living room that doubled as everything else. It was small. It was not impressive. The heating was unreliable, and the neighbors above them had a dog that barked at its own shadow. But it was theirs. Ryan unlocked the front door, and Chloe shot past him like she'd been released from a cannon, dropping her backpack in the hallway, a habit he'd given up trying to correct, and heading straight for the kitchen table where she'd left her coloring books that morning. "Shoes," Ryan called after her. "They're basically off." "They're not even close to off." She groaned dramatically, backtracked, kicked off her sneakers in the general vicinity of the shoe rack, and disappeared again. Ryan picked up the sneakers, placed them neatly on the rack, hung up her backpack, and started the familiar choreography of their evening routine. Dinner first. Tonight was pasta, not because he'd planned it, but because pasta was cheap, fast, and one of 4 meals Chloe would eat without negotiation. The other 3 were chicken nuggets, grilled cheese, and what she called breakfast dinner, which was just scrambled eggs and toast but felt special because it was out of order. He filled a pot with water, set it on the one good burner, and started chopping an onion. From the living room, he could hear Chloe narrating something to herself, probably a story she was making up as she colored. She did that constantly, created entire worlds with populations and governments and dramatic plot twists while filling in pictures of cartoon animals. He wondered sometimes if she'd be a writer when she grew up, or a director, or a very intense city planner. The water boiled. He dropped in the spaghetti, stirred the sauce. Jar sauce, nothing fancy, the kind that was 2 for $5 at the grocery store, and set the timer on his phone. "Chloe, wash your hands. Dinner in 8 minutes. Can I have 10? You can have 8. 9? You're negotiating in the wrong direction. Hands. Now." He heard the bathroom faucet turn on, which may or may not have involved actual soap. He'd check later. Picking your battles was the first rule of single parenting, and hand-washing compliance was a battle he only had energy for about 60% of the time. They ate together at the kitchen table, which was technically a card table Ryan had bought at a thrift store and covered with a tablecloth Chloe had picked out. It had sunflowers on it, bright yellow, cheerful in a way that made the whole kitchen feel less depressing. Chloe twirled her spaghetti with more enthusiasm than skill, getting sauce on her chin, her shirt, and somehow one of her elbows. "Dad, when's the parent thing at school?" "Parent-teacher conference next Thursday. Are you going to come?" "Of course I'm going to come." "Marcus's dad never comes to anything." "Well, I'm not Marcus's dad." "I know, you're better." She said it casually, the way kids say things that crack your chest open. Ryan took a sip of water to buy himself a second. Thanks, Bug. You're welcome. Can I have more garlic bread? After dinner came the evening gauntlet. Homework, which tonight was a worksheet about rhyming words that Chloe powered through in 4 minutes while asking Ryan to time her. Bath, which involved a negotiation about water temperature and a lengthy performance involving rubber ducks. And finally, the sacred bedtime ritual that had remained unchanged since Chloe was 4. She picked the book. He read it. She asked questions that had nothing to do with the book. He answered them anyway. She asked for water. He got her water. She asked for one more chapter. He said no. She asked again. He said, okay, one more. She fell asleep halfway through it. Ryan sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment after her breathing evened out. Her room was small, barely big enough for the twin bed, a dresser, and the bookshelf he'd built from scrap wood that leaned slightly to the left, no matter how many times he shimmed it. The walls were covered in her artwork, a rotating gallery of marker drawings and watercolor experiments taped up with the colored tape she'd begged him to buy. She looked so peaceful when she slept, so completely unbothered by the fact that their apartment was too small and their truck needed 2 tries to start, and her dad was the guy nobody noticed at work. She didn't know about any of that. She didn't know that her mother had left when she was 11 months old. She didn't know that Ryan had spent the first year after that barely sleeping, barely eating, learning how to warm a bottle with one hand while bouncing a screaming baby with the other at 3 a.m. in an apartment with no help and no plan. She didn't know, and Ryan was determined to keep it that way for as long as possible. Not the truth, she'd learn that eventually, and he'd tell her honestly when she was ready. But the weight of it, the heaviness. She didn't need to carry that. He carried it for both of them, and he'd carry it for as long as his legs held out. He kissed her forehead, turned on her nightlight, the one shaped like a crescent moon that cast a warm gold glow across the ceiling, and pulled her door almost closed, leaving it open just a crack the way she liked. Then he went to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water because he couldn't afford anything more interesting, and sat down at the card table in the quiet apartment and stared at the pile of bills he'd been avoiding. Rent, electric, his truck insurance, Chloe's after-school program, the dentist appointment she needed next month that his insurance only partially covered, the shoes she needed because her feet were growing faster than his ability to budget for them. He ran the numbers the way he always did, on the back of an envelope with a pencil, because there was something about seeing it in his own handwriting that made it feel more manageable than a spreadsheet. The math worked out. Barely. It always barely worked out. There was no savings, no cushion, no room for anything to go wrong. And Ryan sat there in the quiet kitchen with the sunflower tablecloth and the one broken burner, and he didn't feel sorry for himself. That was the thing people never understood about his life. He wasn't miserable. He was tired, sure. He was stretched thin. He worried about money constantly and slept too little and sometimes caught himself spacing out at work because his brain was running a background process calculating whether he could swing new winter boots for Chloe and still make rent. But he had Chloe. He had those 22 minutes in the truck. He had the drawings on the fridge and the bedtime stories and the way she said obviously like a tiny CEO who'd already figured out the world. That was enough. It had to be enough. He went to bed at 11, set his alarm for 5:30, and lay in the dark listening to the dog upstairs bark at absolutely nothing. Friday morning started the way every morning started, with Chloe standing next to his bed at 6:15, fully dressed in an outfit she'd picked herself, asking if they could have pancakes. We had pancakes Wednesday. That was 2 days ago. That's basically forever. We're having cereal. What if I said please? Then we'd be having cereal politely. She scowled at him, but it was performative. 2 minutes later, she was sitting at the kitchen table eating Cheerios and telling him about a dream she'd had where their apartment building could fly. Ryan made her lunch, peanut butter and jelly, apple slices, a juice box, and 3 Oreos because he believed strongly that a childhood without occasional Oreos was a childhood not worth having. He packed it in the purple lunchbox she'd chosen at Target with the seriousness of someone selecting a briefcase for their first day at a law firm. He drove her to school, walked her to the front entrance because she still wanted him to, even though some of the other kids got dropped off at the curb, and watched her disappear through the double doors with a wave over her shoulder that was part goodbye and part dismissal. Then he drove to Grayson Tower. The morning was uneventful by maintenance worker standards, which meant he fixed a leaking faucet on 12, replaced a ceiling tile on 8 that had water damage from last month's plumbing incident, and spent 45 minutes in the basement sorting through a shipment of cleaning supplies that had been delivered to the wrong loading dock. It was during his lunch break that things shifted. Ryan ate lunch in the same place every day, a bench in the small courtyard behind Grayson Tower that most employees didn't know existed. It was tucked between the building and the parking garage, shaded by 2 trees that had somehow survived being surrounded by concrete on all sides. He liked it because it was quiet and because nobody else was ever there. Today, someone else was there. A woman sat on the other end of the bench, her back straight, her legs crossed, her attention completely consumed by her phone. She was typing furiously with both thumbs, her jaw tight, her brows drawn together in a way that suggested whoever she was texting was about to have a very bad afternoon. Ryan recognized her. Not personally. They'd never spoken. But he knew who she was, the way every maintenance worker in the building knew who occupied the offices they cleaned. Victoria Hayes, 27th floor. Corner office with the floor-to-ceiling windows that he'd cleaned the inside of exactly once during a weekend shift, and had spent the entire time trying not to think about what it would be like to see that view every morning instead of a basement supply closet. She was the youngest senior executive in the company's history. He'd overheard that from 2 women in the elevator once. Something about her being a prodigy, fast-tracked, the kind of career trajectory that made older executives nervous. He didn't know the details. He didn't follow office politics. He just knew she was important, she was busy, and she was currently sitting on his bench. He sat down on the opposite end, leaving a respectful amount of space, and unwrapped his sandwich. Turkey and Swiss on whole wheat. He'd made it that morning while half asleep, and the mustard distribution was uneven, but it was food. Victoria didn't look up. Her thumbs kept moving. Her phone buzzed. She read whatever came back and made a sound. Not quite a word, more like a sharp exhale through her nose that communicated an entire paragraph of frustration. Ryan ate his sandwich. He didn't stare. He didn't try to start a conversation. He'd spent 3 years in this building learning that people on the upper floors did not want to chat with people who unclogged their toilets. But then her phone rang, and the conversation that followed was impossible to ignore. Not because Ryan was eavesdropping. The courtyard was 15 feet wide, and she wasn't exactly whispering. "Mom! Mom! No, I'm at work. I can't. Yes, I know it's next Saturday. I know. I've known for 3 months because you've reminded me approximately 47 times. Ryan stared at his sandwich with great focus. No, I'm not bringing anyone, because there's no one to bring. We've been over this. Her voice had the controlled tone of someone who'd had this exact argument so many times that the words came out pre-formatted. I'm not... No. Mom, listen to me. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't have time for a boyfriend. I barely have time to eat lunch, which, by the way, I'm supposed to be doing right now. Ryan took a very deliberate bite of his sandwich. The mustard was all on the left side. Tragic. I know Dad's worried. I know you're worried. I know Aunt Patricia's worried, and frankly, Aunt Patricia should worry about her own... Victoria stopped herself. Breathed. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Can we please not do this right now? A pause. A long one. I love you too, Mom. I'll be there Saturday, alone, like always. She hung up and sat very still for about 5 seconds. Then she pressed both palms against her face and said, very quietly, I'm going to lose my mind. Ryan should have stayed out of it. He knew he should have stayed out of it. He was a maintenance worker eating a lopsided sandwich on a bench. He was nobody. She was a corner office executive with her name on a parking spot. They existed in different galaxies. But the thing about Ryan Walker was that he was constitutionally incapable of watching someone suffer in his immediate vicinity without at least acknowledging it. It was the same impulse that made him fix the flickering light before anyone filed a ticket. The same instinct that made him pick up trash in the stairwell that wasn't technically his responsibility. He just noticed things, and once he noticed, he couldn't unnotice. Rough call? He said. Victoria's hands dropped from her face. She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time, which she was, in every way that mattered. Her eyes were sharp, dark brown, the kind that probably made people in boardrooms shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Her hair was black, pulled back in a way that was precise without being severe. She was wearing a navy blazer over a white blouse, and everything about her appearance said, "I have been carefully assembled this morning by someone who does not make mistakes." She looked at him. Then she looked at his sandwich, then back at him. "You could say that," she said. "Parent stuff?" Her eyebrows rose slightly. "You heard. The courtyard has the acoustics of a cathedral. Not your fault." Something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "My mother is convinced that if I don't produce a boyfriend by next Saturday's family dinner, she's going to die of worry." Her words. "She will literally die." That's a lot of pressure. You have no idea. My father's already planning my spinster accommodations. I think he's looking at cats. Ryan almost laughed. "How old are you?" 30? And they're already on spinster watch? In my family, if you're not engaged by 28, they start measuring you for the convent. She paused. We're not religious. It's just a metaphor. A dramatic, guilt-laden metaphor. Ryan nodded. He finished his sandwich, crumpled the plastic wrap, and stood up to throw it in the trash can 3 steps away. When he turned back, Victoria was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decode. It was calculating, but not cold, like she was running some kind of internal computation that he was somehow a variable in. "Can I ask you something completely insane?" she said. "Sure." "What are you doing next Saturday?" Ryan blinked. "What?" "Next Saturday evening, around 7. Are you busy?" I have my daughter. I have her every day, actually. She's 6. Victoria processed this information without any visible reaction. "Could you get a babysitter?" "Theoretically. Why?" She stood up. She was shorter than he expected, maybe 5'6" in heels, but she carried herself like someone much taller. She folded her arms and looked at him with the kind of directness that probably worked very well in negotiations. "I need a fake boyfriend for one dinner. My parents' house. 3 hours, maximum. I need someone who can be polite, make conversation, and convincingly pretend to be in a relationship with me. I know this sounds absolutely insane. I know we've never met. I know you probably think I'm having some kind of breakdown. But I'm running out of options, and I am running out of time, and you seem..." She paused, searching for the word. "Normal." Ryan stared at her. "I'm sorry," he said. "Did you just ask me to be your fake boyfriend?" "I did, and I'm prepared to compensate you for your time. You want to pay me to pretend to date you. When you say it like that, it sounds terrible. How would you say it?" "I'd say I'm proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement where you help me avoid a family crisis, and I help you afford whatever it is you need affording." She gestured vaguely at him in a way that was accidentally offensive, and she immediately seemed to realize it. "That came out wrong. I'm sorry. I'm not judging you. I don't even know your name." "Ryan." "Ryan, I'm Victoria. I know who you are." "Right, the building thing." She uncrossed her arms. For the first time since the conversation started, she looked uncertain. Not vulnerable, exactly. Ryan got the sense that vulnerability was something Victoria Hayes had trained herself out of years ago, but close. "Look, I know this is bizarre. I know I'm basically ambushing you during your lunch break with a proposition that belongs in a bad romantic comedy. But I'm genuinely desperate, and you're genuinely the first person I've talked to in weeks who didn't want something from me. That probably says more about my life than I'd like to admit." Ryan was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Chloe. He thought about Mrs. Delgado next door, who babysat sometimes and only charged $20. He thought about the pile of bills on the card table and the shoes Chloe needed and the dentist appointment coming up. He thought about how Victoria Hayes, who probably made more money in a month than he made in a year, had just told him he was the first person in weeks who didn't want something from her. "I'm not an actor," he said. "I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to eat dinner with my parents and not mention that we met 5 minutes ago." What would I tell them? That we've been seeing each other for a few months, that you're whatever you are. You don't have to lie about yourself. Just lie about us. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. This was, without question, the strangest conversation he'd ever had. And he'd once had a 20-minute argument with a 5-year-old about whether the moon was a planet, so his bar was high. "One dinner," he said. "One dinner. 3 hours. Maximum. And you're not going to make this weird at work. I barely know what floor the maintenance office is on. We will never interact professionally. He looked at her. She looked at him. The October sun cut through the gap between the buildings and lit up the courtyard bench like a stage. Okay, Ryan said. Victoria blinked. Okay? Yeah, okay, I'll do it. Just like that? You want me to make it harder? No, I absolutely do not. She pulled out her phone. Give me your number. I'll send you the details. They exchanged numbers with the awkward efficiency of two people who couldn't quite believe what they'd just agreed to. Victoria's phone buzzed again, the office reclaiming her, and she was already turning to leave when she paused. Ryan. Yeah? Thank you. I mean it. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen me at a dinner party. She almost smiled. Almost. Then she was gone, heels clicking against the concrete, disappearing back into the tower where she belonged, leaving Ryan standing in the courtyard with his crumpled sandwich wrapper and the distinct feeling that he'd just made either the best or worst decision of his adult life. He went back to work. He replaced a smoke detector battery on 14. He fixed a squeaky door hinge on 9. He did not think about Victoria Hayes. He thought about Victoria Hayes constantly, not in a romantic way. He wasn't stupid enough to start building some kind of fantasy around a 5-minute interaction with a woman who was so far out of his league, they weren't even playing the same sport. He thought about it the way you thought about any decision that deviated sharply from your normal routine. The logistics, the risks, the way Chloe's face would look when he told her daddy was going out on Saturday night, which was something that literally never happened. He picked Chloe up at 5:28. She had another drawing. This one featured the class hamster, significantly larger than the other animals, towering over the school like a benevolent furry monster. Ryan put it on the fridge next to the first one. Prime real estate was getting crowded. Over dinner, grilled cheese night, Chloe studied him across the table with the unsettling perceptiveness that 6-year-olds occasionally deployed without warning. You look different, she said. Different how? I don't know, like you're thinking about something. I'm always thinking about something. Yeah, but usually it's boring stuff, bills and schedules and boring stuff. This is a different kind of thinking. Ryan looked at his daughter, this small person who knew him better than anyone else on the planet, and marveled for the 1,000th time at the fact that he'd somehow been entrusted with her care. I might go out Saturday night, he said, just for a few hours. Mrs. Delgado would come over. Chloe's eyes went wide. Go out? Like out? Like leaving the apartment for non-grocery reasons? It's not a big deal. It's a huge deal. You never go anywhere. That's not true. I go to work. That doesn't count, and you know it. He couldn't argue with that. It's just a dinner. A friend asked me to help with something. What friend? You don't have friends. Thanks, Chloe. Really appreciate that. I didn't mean it mean. I just meant you don't hang out with people. You hang out with me. And you're excellent company. I know, but you should also have other people. Miss Patterson says humans are social creatures. Miss Patterson sounds very wise. She is, except for the witch part. Ryan smiled. He cleaned up dinner, supervised bath time, read 2 chapters of a book about a mouse who solved mysteries, and put Chloe to bed. Then he sat in the living room and stared at his phone, where a text from an unknown number, now saved as Victoria Hayes, had arrived during dinner. Saturday, 6:45 p.m. pickup. I'll send the address. Dress code is smart casual. My parents are warm but observant. My mother will ask about your job. My father will ask about your intentions. My Aunt Patricia will ask about everything else. I'll prep you beforehand. Thank you again, Ryan. I owe you. Ryan read the message twice. He thought about typing something clever, decided he wasn't clever, and typed, "Got it. See you Saturday." He put his phone down. He looked at the fridge where Chloe's drawings were held up by magnets shaped like fruit, and the best dad in the whole world. Card sat in the center, wrinkled and smudged and perfect. One dinner, 3 hours. A harmless favor for a stranger. He had no way of knowing that it would be so much more than that. The rest of the week passed the way weeks always passed in Ryan's life, in a blur of routine so consistent it felt almost meditative. Wake up, make breakfast, drive Chloe to school, go to work, fix things nobody noticed were broken, pick up Chloe, make dinner, do the bedtime ritual, stare at the bills, go to sleep, repeat. The rhythm was so familiar that the days almost didn't need him to be fully present for them. His body knew the choreography. His mind was free to wander, and it wandered against his better judgment toward Saturday. Victoria texted him twice during the week, once on Tuesday, with a brief biography of her parents, names, occupations, conversational landmines to avoid, written with the clinical precision of a corporate briefing document. Richard and Eleanor Hayes. He was a retired attorney. She was a former professor of art history who now spent her time managing the family's philanthropic foundation and apparently worrying obsessively about her daughter's love life. The second text came Thursday evening. I should warn you, my family is wealthy. Not obnoxious about it, but the house is significant. Don't let it throw you. Ryan typed back, I fix broken things in a building that costs more than my entire block. I think I can handle a nice house. Victoria's response was a single period. Then a few seconds later, that was almost charming. Almost is my specialty, Ryan replied, and immediately felt like an idiot. On Friday night, after Chloe was asleep, he stood in front of his closet, which was less a closet and more a rod bolted to the wall behind a curtain, and confronted the reality that he owned exactly one button-down shirt that didn't have a stain on it. It was dark blue. He'd bought it 2 years ago for a job interview at a property management company that had never called him back. He tried it on. It still fit, barely. He'd put on some muscle since then from the daily physical work, and the shirt was tighter across the shoulders than it used to be. Not tight enough to look ridiculous, but enough that he'd need to avoid any dramatic arm movements. He paired it with his least faded jeans and the one pair of shoes he owned that weren't work boots. They were brown, slightly scuffed, but clean. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and tried to see what Victoria's parents would see. A maintenance worker, a single dad, a man who drove a truck that needed 2 tries to start and lived in an apartment where the heating worked on an honor system. Not exactly the boyfriend a billionaire family was expecting. He took a breath, hung the shirt back up, and went to bed telling himself it was just 3 hours. Just a dinner, just a favor, nothing more. Saturday arrived the way all dreaded events arrive. Too quickly and not quickly enough. Ryan spent the morning at the park with Chloe, pushing her on the swings, watching her attempt the monkey bars with a determination that bordered on reckless. She fell twice, got back up both times, and informed him that falling was just practice for flying. Mrs. Delgado came over at 6. She was 73, widowed, lived next door in apartment 2B, and had been watching Chloe intermittently since she was a toddler. She brought homemade cookies, which guaranteed Chloe's complete compliance for the evening, and gave Ryan a look when he came out of his room in the blue button-down. Well, look at you, she said. Don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm just observing that you look like a real person tonight instead of someone who lives inside a supply closet. Thank you, Mrs. Delgado. That's very kind. She patted his cheek. Go, have fun. Chloe and I are going to eat cookies and watch movies, and you're going to stop worrying for 3 whole hours. Chloe appeared in the hallway, already in pajamas, cookie in each hand. Dad, you look weird. Weird good or weird bad? She considered this with unnecessary gravity. Weird, like you're trying, which is good. You should try more. Thank you for that assessment. You're welcome. Bring me something. From a dinner? A roll. I like rolls. I'll see what I can do. He kissed the top of her head, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door before he could talk himself out of it. Victoria had sent him the address. He'd looked it up on his phone and then looked at it again because he'd assumed there was a mistake. The house was in Cherry Hills Village, which was the kind of neighborhood where the driveways were longer than Ryan's entire street, and the mailboxes probably cost more than his truck. He drove south on I-25, watching the city give way to progressively nicer suburbs, and turned onto a road lined with mature trees and stone walls that suggested the houses behind them were the kind that had names instead of numbers. The Hayes residence was at the end of a cul-de-sac, behind a wrought iron gate that opened automatically when he pulled up, presumably because Victoria had given them his license plate number. The driveway curved through a landscaped yard, past a fountain that was actually running. A fountain. In a yard, like this was Versailles, and ended in a circular turnaround in front of a house that was. It was a lot of house. Stone and timber, 3 stories, with windows that glowed warmly in the October dusk. Not showy in the way of new money. No columns, no gold fixtures, no marble lions guarding the entrance. Just quietly, confidently enormous. The kind of house that didn't need to announce its wealth because its existence was announcement enough. Ryan parked his dented F-150 between a Mercedes and a BMW and sat in the truck for a full minute, both hands on the steering wheel, questioning every decision he'd made that week. Then his phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "I see your truck. Stop panicking and come inside." He got out, walked to the front door, rang the bell. Victoria opened it herself. She was wearing a dark green dress that looked simple and probably cost more than his rent. Her hair was down. He'd only ever seen it pulled back at work, and it changed her face, softened it somehow. She looked like a different person, or maybe the same person, just a version who wasn't performing for a boardroom. "You came," she said. "I said I would." "I know, She shook her head. "Never mind, come in. And remember, we've been dating for 3 months. We met at a coffee shop. You like hiking. I'm trying to be less of a workaholic. That's the story." Coffee shop, hiking, less workaholic. Got it. "And Ryan?" "Yeah?" "Just be yourself. That's actually the whole strategy." She led him inside, and the door closed behind them. And Ryan Walker, the maintenance worker, the single dad, the man nobody noticed, walked into a life he'd never imagined being a part of, even for one night. The foyer smelled like roasted garlic and fresh rosemary, and something sweet baking somewhere deep in the house. Ryan registered all of it in the 3 seconds before a woman appeared from around the corner with a wine glass in one hand and an expression that could only be described as strategic delight. "So this is him," Eleanor Hayes said. She was mid-60s, silver-haired, elegant in the way that certain women became more refined with age rather than less. She wore a cream-colored blouse and pearl earrings and a smile that was warm on the surface but conducting a full background investigation underneath. Victoria stepped slightly closer to Ryan, not touching him, but close enough that it suggested proximity was habitual. "Mom, this is Ryan. Ryan, this is my mother, Eleanor." "Mrs. Hayes." Ryan extended his hand. "Thank you for having me." Eleanor took his hand with both of hers, holding it a beat longer than a standard handshake, studying him the way an art historian might study a painting she hadn't seen before. Not judging yet, just cataloging. "Ryan, we've heard absolutely nothing about you, which means Victoria's been hiding you, which means she actually likes you. Come in. Richard is in the kitchen pretending he's not nervous." "Mom." "What?" He changed his shirt twice. Victoria closed her eyes briefly in a way that communicated an entire childhood of this. Ryan felt his shoulders drop half an inch. There was something disarming about a family that embarrassed each other on purpose. It reminded him of something he hadn't had in a long time. The house was beautiful in the way that old money houses were beautiful, not decorated so much as accumulated. Art on the walls that looked original, not printed. Furniture that had weight and history. Bookshelves everywhere. Real books. Red books. Books with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. This wasn't a showroom. People lived here. People had been living here for decades. Richard Hayes was standing at the kitchen island slicing bread when they walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a full head of white hair and the kind of face that had probably been intimidating in a courtroom and was now mostly just kind. He wiped his hands on a kitchen towel, looked at Ryan, and offered a handshake that was firm without being aggressive. "Ryan, good to meet you. What can I get you to drink?" "Water's fine, thank you, sir." "Sir," Richard glanced at Victoria. "He calls me sir." "Don't make it weird, Dad." "I'm not making it weird. I'm appreciating it. The last one called me Rich. Nobody calls me Rich." "The last one was terrible," Eleanor said, handing Ryan a glass of water without being asked, which he appreciated more than he could express. "Derek wasn't terrible," Victoria said, though her tone suggested she was defending the statement out of obligation rather than conviction. "Derek wore sunglasses inside," Richard said. "At dinner. In November. That's not a crime." "It should be." Ryan took a sip of his water and let the rhythm of the family wash over him. This was clearly a household that communicated through gentle combat. where affection was expressed through teasing and love was measured in the quality of your insults. It was so different from the quiet solitude of his own apartment that it almost made his chest ache. Dinner was in the dining room, an actual dining room with a table that seated 12 and candles that someone had lit with real matches. The fourth chair was occupied by Aunt Patricia, who arrived 10 minutes late with a cashmere shawl and the energy of someone who treated every social gathering as a personal intelligence gathering operation. "So," Patricia said before Ryan had even unfolded his napkin, "what do you do?" Victoria tensed beside him. He could feel it, the slight shift in her posture, the held breath. This was the moment she'd been dreading, the moment the maintenance worker was exposed and the whole arrangement fell apart. "I work in facilities operations at Grayson Tower," Ryan said. "Building systems, infrastructure maintenance, that kind of thing." It wasn't a lie. It was his job described from a slightly different angle. Victoria glanced at him sideways, and he caught something in her expression. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition, like she'd been prepared to jump in and rescue the moment, and was surprised to find it didn't need rescuing. "Grayson Tower," Richard leaned forward with genuine interest. "That's a Mercer Holdings building, isn't it? 40-something stories?" 44. Built in 2003, renovated in 2018. The HVAC system's a nightmare, but the bones are solid. He said it without thinking, the same way he talked about the building to himself, with the casual expertise of someone who knew every pipe, every circuit, every structural quirk. Richard nodded slowly, the way men of his generation nodded when they encountered competence. "You know your stuff." "I've been there 3 years. Hard not to learn the building when you spend every day inside it." "That's what I always told my associates," Richard said. "You want to understand a case, live inside it. Don't just read the briefs. Walk the ground." Eleanor served dinner, roasted chicken, potatoes, a salad with something fancy in it that Ryan couldn't identify but tasted incredible. And the conversation moved the way dinner conversations did in families like this, jumping from topic to topic, circling back, overlapping. Patricia asked about Ryan's education. He told her he'd done 2 years of college before dropping out. He didn't explain why, that his girlfriend at the time had gotten pregnant and he'd chosen work over school because someone had to, and that girlfriend had chosen to leave 11 months later because she'd decided motherhood was a mistake she could walk away from. He didn't mention any of that. He just said he'd taken a different path, and the way he said it left no room for pity. "And Victoria tells us you have a daughter," Eleanor said, and the way she said it, gently, carefully, like she was unwrapping something fragile, made Ryan realize that Victoria had prepped her family the same way she'd prepped him. "Chloe, she's 6. She's—" He paused, searching for the right word, and smiled without meaning to. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me." The table went quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone says something so plainly true that no one wants to talk over it. "Tell us about her," Eleanor said. So he did. He told them about the drawings on the fridge and the bedtime negotiations, and the way she said obviously, like she'd invented the word. He told them about the hamster investigation and her theory about her teacher being a witch. He told them about the purple lunchbox and the 22-minute car rides and the way she fell asleep mid-chapter every single night. He talked about his daughter the way he always talked about his daughter, like she was the most interesting person he'd ever met, because she was. When he finished, Eleanor was looking at him with an expression that had shifted from investigative to something softer, something unguarded. Richard was nodding slowly, his bread forgotten on his plate. Patricia was sipping her wine with the look of a woman who was reluctantly revising an opinion. And Victoria was staring at him. Not the way she stared at people in meetings. Ryan had never seen that. But he could imagine it, the sharp focus, the calculation. This was different. She was looking at him like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to find, something she didn't have a category for, and the discovery had caught her so off guard that she'd forgotten to hide it. She looked away when she realized he'd noticed. The rest of dinner passed easily. Richard told stories about cases he'd argued, carefully edited for a non-legal audience, and Eleanor talked about a gallery exhibition she was curating. Patricia interrogated Ryan about his views on real estate, which he handled by admitting he'd never owned property and wasn't ashamed of it, which seemed to simultaneously confuse and impress her. Nobody asked him about money. Nobody asked him about his career trajectory or his 5-year plan or any of the questions that people in this world usually use to measure a man's worth. They just talked to him, like he was a person, like he belonged at the table. It was almost 10 o'clock when Ryan helped clear the dishes. Instinct, not performance. And Richard clapped him on the shoulder in the kitchen. "Ryan." "Yes, sir." "Stop calling me sir. It makes me feel ancient." He paused. "Come back. Bring the little one." Ryan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Victoria walked him to his truck. The night was cold now, October asserting itself, and she'd pulled a coat over her dress that she held closed at the throat with one hand. They stood beside his dented F-150, under a sky full of stars that you could actually see out here, away from the city lights, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "You were—" Victoria started, then stopped, restarted. "That was nothing like what I expected." "Bad?" "The opposite of bad. My mother is already planning the wedding. My father called you a real one when you were in the bathroom. Aunt Patricia hasn't approved of anyone I've dated since 2016. But I wasn't acting," Ryan said, and the honesty of it surprised even him. "I mean, the dating part was acting. The rest was just me." "I know." Victoria looked at him in the faint light from the porch. "That's what made it work." Silence. The kind where something unspoken was forming in the space between two people. Too new to name, too real to ignore. "So," Ryan said. "Favor complete. Good luck with the family." "Right." Victoria nodded. "Favor complete." He opened his truck door. The engine turned over on the second try, same as always. He pulled down the driveway, through the gate, and onto the dark road. And in his rearview mirror, he could see Victoria still standing in the driveway, watching him go. He thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Victoria texted him Sunday morning. Not about the arrangement, not about work. She asked how Chloe liked the roll he'd brought home. Ryan had in fact smuggled 2 dinner rolls out of the Hayes residence in his jacket pocket, like a man committing a bread heist, and Chloe had declared them the best rolls in the history of rolls, including the ones at Red Lobster. He told Victoria this. She sent back a laughing emoji, which seemed out of character for someone who probably sent emails structured like legal documents. Then she texted again Monday evening, asked how his day was. He told her about a burst pipe on the 6th floor that had turned a supply closet into a swimming pool. She told him about a board meeting where a 60-year-old executive had mispronounced synergy as synergy, and nobody corrected him because he was the CFO. Then Tuesday, then Wednesday, then every day. The conversations were short at first, 5 or 6 messages, traded between the cracks of their very different schedules. But they got longer. Ryan found himself reaching for his phone during lunch breaks, not because he was expecting a text, but because he was hoping for one. Victoria found herself typing messages during conference calls, hiding her phone under the table like a teenager passing notes in class, which was so unlike her professional image that it actually made her laugh at herself. She told him things. Small things at first. Complaints about her workload, frustrations with colleagues who underestimated her because she was young and female and refused to play the political games they expected. Then bigger things. How she'd built her career by being the person who worked harder, stayed later, prepared more thoroughly than anyone else in the room, and how the cost of that was a life so empty of personal connection that her mother's phone calls were sometimes the only non-work conversations she had all week. "That's not healthy," Ryan said during one of their phone calls. They'd graduated from texting to calling somewhere around the 2nd week because Ryan typed too slowly and Victoria talked too fast. "I know it's not healthy. Do you do anything that's not work?" A pause. "I go to the gym." "That doesn't count." "Why not?" "Because you probably treat it like work. You probably have a spreadsheet for your reps." The silence on the other end told him he was exactly right. "I used to paint," she said quietly. "In college. Watercolors, mostly. Landscapes. It was the one thing I did that nobody graded me on." "Why'd you stop?" "Because nobody graded me on it." Ryan understood that more than he wanted to admit. The tyranny of productivity. The way the world trained you to believe that anything that didn't produce a measurable outcome was a waste of time. He'd fallen into the same trap, just from the opposite end. Not because he was ambitious, but because surviving didn't leave room for anything extra. "You should start again," he said. "Painting?" "Yeah." "When?" "Between the 7 a.m. meetings and the midnight emails." Chloe draws every single day. She's terrible at it, objectively terrible. Her people don't have necks and her dogs look like potatoes, but she does it because it makes her happy, and she doesn't care that it's not perfect. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Your daughter sounds like she has life figured out better than I do." "She absolutely does. It's humbling." 2 weeks turned into 3. 3 turned into a month. Ryan didn't know what to call what was happening between them. It wasn't dating. They hadn't gone on a date. It wasn't friendship. Friends didn't make his stomach drop when their name appeared on his phone screen. It was something in between, something still forming, like wet concrete that hadn't set yet. Still shapeable. Still uncertain. Then Victoria met Chloe, and everything accelerated. It happened on a Saturday. Victoria had asked if she could drop off something at his apartment, a book she'd mentioned during one of their calls, a collection of watercolor landscapes she'd bought impulsively at a used bookstore, the first non-work purchase she'd made in months. Ryan said sure, gave her the address, and then spent 20 minutes panic cleaning the apartment before realizing that the apartment was never going to look like anything other than what it was. A small, lived-in space where a single dad and his 6-year-old daughter made do with what they had. Chloe was at the kitchen table when the doorbell rang, working on an elaborate marker drawing that appeared to involve the class hamster leading a military campaign. She looked up when Ryan opened the door, and Victoria stepped inside. Victoria was wearing jeans and a sweater. No blazer, no heels. Her hair was down and she had no makeup on, and she looked like a completely different person from the polished executive who occupied the corner office on 27. She looked like someone who'd gotten dressed without consulting a mirror, which, Ryan would later learn, was exactly what had happened. She also looked nervous. Victoria Hayes, who stared down boardrooms and managed billion-dollar accounts, was nervous about meeting a 6-year-old. "Chloe, this is my friend Victoria." Chloe looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Chloe. The apartment was so quiet Ryan could hear the dog upstairs shifting on its bed. "Are you the one my dad talks to on the phone all the time?" Chloe asked. Ryan closed his eyes. "Yes," Victoria said. "That's me." "He laughs when he talks to you. He doesn't laugh a lot usually." "Chloe, it's true, Dad. You're kind of serious." Victoria looked at Ryan. He could see her trying not to smile and failing. "Is that true? You're kind of serious?" "I'm standing right here." Chloe had already moved on. She slid off her chair and walked over to Victoria with the complete lack of social anxiety that only children possessed, holding up her drawing. "Do you want to see my picture?" Victoria crouched down. Not the way adults usually crouch down to talk to children. The performative, slightly condescending squat that said, "I'm getting on your level because I'm supposed to." She crouched like she was genuinely interested, like the marker drawing of a hamster army was the most important piece of art she'd encountered that week. "Tell me about this," Victoria said. And Chloe did. For 15 minutes, in extraordinary detail. She explained the hamster's backstory, his motivations, the political landscape of the elementary school that had driven him to revolution. Victoria listened to every word, asked follow-up questions that were surprisingly sophisticated for a conversation about rodent warfare, and at one point suggested a flanking strategy that made Chloe's eyes go wide with respect. Ryan stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and watched 2 strangers become friends in real time, and something shifted inside his chest. Not a crack. He'd been cracked before, when Chloe's mother left, when he'd held his daughter for the first time in an empty apartment and realized he was all she had. This was different. This was something opening, something that had been sealed shut for years, slowly, carefully, beginning to unseal. Victoria stayed for 3 hours. She sat on the living room floor with Chloe and drew pictures, terrible pictures, genuinely bad, stick figures with disproportionate heads and houses that looked like they were melting. Chloe was delighted. She'd never had an adult who was willing to be as bad at drawing as she was, and the 2 of them turned it into a competition to see who could draw the worst horse, which devolved into hysterical laughter that filled the small apartment in a way Ryan hadn't heard in years. He sat on the couch and watched them. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. When Victoria left, Chloe stood at the window and watched her car pull away from the curb. Dad? Yeah, Bug. Is she going to come back? The question hit Ryan harder than Chloe probably intended, because embedded in it was every loss the girl had ever experienced, compressed into 5 words. She'd learned early, too early, that people left. Her mother had left. Ryan's parents had left, moved to Florida, called on birthdays, and forgot the rest. The babysitter before Mrs. Delgado had left. The world had taught Chloe that people were temporary, and now she was asking the only person she fully trusted whether this new person would follow the same pattern. I don't know, Ryan said, because he'd promised himself a long time ago that he would never lie to his daughter about things that mattered. I want her to. I know. She's really bad at drawing horses. The worst I've ever seen. I like her, Dad. Ryan looked at his daughter's face in the fading afternoon light, the hope in it, the vulnerability she was too young to hide, and he felt the weight of a decision forming that was bigger than anything he'd agreed to in a courtyard over a turkey sandwich. I like her too, he said. That night, after Chloe was asleep, Ryan sat on the couch and held his phone and thought about calling Victoria and thought about not calling Victoria and thought about how complicated his life was about to become if he did anything other than walk away right now. He called her. She wants you to come back, he said without preamble. Chloe? Yeah. Silence. Then very quietly, I want to come back too. Victoria. I know what you're going to say, that this started as a favor, that it was supposed to be one dinner, that your daughter is involved now, and you can't afford to let someone into her life who might not stay. That's exactly what I'm going to say. Then let me say this first. He heard her take a breath, the kind of breath people took before they said something they couldn't take back. I haven't felt like myself in years. I've been performing, at work, with my family, in every relationship I've ever had. I perform because that's what's expected and that's what's safe. And today, sitting on your living room floor drawing terrible horses with your daughter was the first time in as long as I can remember that I wasn't performing. I was just there, present, happy. Ryan didn't say anything for a long time. I can't promise anything, he said finally. I'm a maintenance worker with a 6-year-old and a truck that barely starts. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where this goes. I can't give you the life you're used to. I don't want the life I'm used to. I just told you that. You say that now. People always say that in the beginning. I'm not people. Everyone's people, Victoria. More silence. The kind that was full instead of empty. Then let me prove it, she said. Don't decide right now. Just let me show up. Not as your fake girlfriend or a dinner arrangement or whatever this started as, just as someone who wants to be there. For both of you. Ryan leaned back against the couch. He stared at the ceiling, at the water stain in the corner that he kept meaning to investigate, and he thought about the drawings on the fridge and the bills on the table and the way Chloe had watched Victoria's car drive away like she was watching something she was already afraid of losing. Saturday, he said. We're going to the park, the one on 8th Avenue. Chloe likes the swings. What time? 10. I'll be there. She was there at 9:45. Victoria showed up at the park that Saturday in sneakers she'd clearly never worn before. Still white, still creased along the toe box, the laces tied with the careful precision of someone who usually wore heels and wasn't entirely sure how casual footwear was supposed to work. She was carrying 2 coffees and a hot chocolate she'd guessed Chloe might like, and the fact that she'd thought about Chloe at all, separately, as her own person with her own preferences, hit Ryan somewhere he wasn't prepared for. Chloe spotted her from the top of the slide and screamed her name across the entire park like she was announcing royalty. 3 other parents turned to look. Victoria waved with the hand not holding drinks, and her smile was so unguarded, so completely absent of the composure she wore like armor at work, that Ryan almost didn't recognize her. That was the second Saturday. Then the third. Then every Saturday and some Wednesdays, and a few Tuesday evenings when Victoria left work early, which, for a woman who hadn't left before 8 p.m. in 3 years, was the equivalent of a tectonic shift. They fell into a rhythm, not a dramatic, sweeping movie montage rhythm, but the ordinary kind, the kind that was built from repeated small choices rather than grand gestures. Victoria would come over after work and sit at the kitchen table helping Chloe with homework while Ryan cooked dinner on the one good burner. She was terrible at first-grade math, which delighted Chloe to no end. "You don't know what 7 plus 8 is?" "I know what it is. I just hesitated." "You're a grown-up. Grown-ups aren't supposed to hesitate." "Grown-ups hesitate all the time. We just hide it better." Ryan would listen from the kitchen, stirring whatever he was stirring, and catch himself smiling at the stove like an idiot. He kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Victoria to get bored or busy, or to realize that spending her evenings in a cramped Capitol Hill apartment with a maintenance worker and his 6-year-old was not, by any rational measure, how a woman in her position should be spending her time. The shoe didn't drop. Not in the first month. Not in the second. Victoria kept showing up, and each time she did, she fit a little more naturally into the spaces of their life, like a puzzle piece that had been cut for a gap nobody knew existed. But Ryan was careful. Careful in the way that people who'd been hurt learned to be. Not cold, not distant, but watchful. He kept a part of himself behind glass, visible but untouchable, because he'd learned the hard way that letting someone all the way in gave them the ability to destroy everything on their way out. Chloe's mother had taught him that, and he'd spent 6 years rebuilding a life from the wreckage, brick by careful brick, and he wasn't going to hand someone the power to knock it down again. Not even someone who drew terrible horses and remembered his daughter's hot chocolate order. Victoria sensed it. She was too smart not to. She could feel the boundary. Not in what Ryan said, but in what he didn't say. In the way he'd pull back slightly when conversations got too deep, change the subject when she asked about the future. Redirect to Chloe whenever the focus turned to the two of them. She didn't push. She'd spent her whole career learning when to press an advantage and when to wait. And she understood instinctively that Ryan's walls weren't stubbornness. They were architecture. They were load-bearing. If you knocked them down too fast, the whole structure came with them. So she waited. She proved herself in the small ways that couldn't be faked. She showed up. She listened. She learned Chloe's routines. Bedtime at 8:30, no exceptions. Shoes off at the door, always. The purple lunchbox got packed the night before because mornings were chaos. She learned that Ryan drank his coffee black because he'd stopped buying cream to save $2 a week. She started bringing cream when she came over, never mentioning it, just putting it in the fridge like it had always been there. And she learned the thing about Ryan that most people never bothered to discover. He was brilliant. Not in the credentialed, pedigreed way the world usually measured brilliance. He didn't have a degree or a title or a line on his resume that would survive a screening algorithm. But the man understood systems the way some people understood music, intuitively, architecturally, at a level that went far beyond what his job title suggested. When Victoria mentioned a supply chain issue her company was dealing with, he asked 3 questions that cut straight to the root cause. When she described a workflow problem in her department, he sketched a solution on a napkin in 30 seconds that her consultants had spent 2 months failing to identify. "How do you know this stuff?" she asked one evening, genuinely baffled, while Chloe was in the bath singing a song she'd invented about a frog detective. Ryan shrugged. "I fix things. That's all I do every day. Something breaks, I figure out why. I figure out how to stop it from breaking again. Doesn't matter if it's a pipe or a process. The logic's the same. You're wasted in that job. I'm employed in that job. There's a difference." Ryan, "Victoria, I appreciate what you're saying, but I have a kid who needs stability. I can't chase what-ifs. I need a paycheck that shows up every 2 weeks, health insurance that covers her dentist appointments, and a schedule that lets me pick her up by 5:30. That's the math. Everything else is just noise." She didn't argue, but she filed it away, the way she filed everything away, in the organized, strategic mind that had built a career out of seeing potential where others saw limitations. Then the crisis came, and everything they'd been carefully building was thrown into chaos overnight. It started on a Tuesday. Victoria arrived at Ryan's apartment at 9 p.m., which was late even for her, and the moment he opened the door, he knew something was wrong. Her eyes were red. Not crying red. She wasn't the kind of person who cried easily, or at least not the kind who let anyone see it, but the raw, strained red of someone who'd been staring at screens and fighting back rage for hours. "What happened?" Ryan said. She walked past him into the kitchen, sat down at the card table with the sunflower tablecloth, and put her head in her hands. Marcus Whitfield happened. Ryan sat across from her. Who's Marcus Whitfield? Senior VP of Operations. He's been at the company for 12 years. He wanted the position I got promoted into. He's been tolerable for the past year, passive-aggressive, but manageable. And tonight I found out he's been actively sabotaging my work for months. She told him the whole story. The presentation she'd been building for 3 weeks. The quarterly strategic review, the one that went directly to the board of directors, the one that could define the trajectory of her entire division, was scheduled for Thursday morning. She'd finished it that afternoon, sent the final version to the shared server, and gone to a meeting. When she came back, the file was corrupted. Not just damaged, restructured. The data had been altered, the projections scrambled, the financial models replaced with older, incorrect versions that would make her analysis look incompetent. At first, I thought it was a technical error, but the IT team pulled the access logs. Her voice was flat, controlled, the way it got when she was containing something enormous. Marcus accessed the file at 4:47 p.m., 12 minutes after I left for my meeting. He was in and out in 9 minutes. Can you prove it was deliberate? I can prove he accessed it. I can't prove intent. He'll say he was reviewing it, accidentally saved over the wrong version, didn't realize the changes propagated. He'll be apologetic and sincere, and everyone will believe him because he's been there 12 years and plays golf with half the board. What about backups? The auto backup saved his version. My original is gone. Ryan sat with that for a moment. He watched Victoria's face, the tight jaw, the way her fingers were pressing into the tablecloth hard enough to leave marks, and he recognized something he'd seen in himself 100 times. The specific exhaustion of someone who'd done everything right and been punished for it by someone who couldn't compete fairly. How long until the presentation? 36 hours. And you need to rebuild the whole thing from scratch? The whole thing. 80 slides, 3 months of data analysis, custom projections, all of it. Ryan looked at the clock on the microwave. 9:14 p.m. Chloe was asleep. Mrs. Delgado was watching a telenovela through the thin wall that separated their apartments. Show me the raw data, he said. Victoria looked up. What? The raw data. The original sources before the presentation. You still have those, right? Your personal files, your notes, your spreadsheets? Yes, but then we can rebuild it. Not the pretty version, but the bones. The analysis, the projections, the numbers. If the logic is right and the data is right, the slides are just packaging. We can do the packaging tomorrow. Ryan, this is a board-level presentation. It's not, I know what it is. You've been telling me about it for 3 weeks. I probably know the structure better than you think I do. He stood up, walked to the counter, and started a pot of coffee. You said the core issue is that your division's operational costs are tracking 15% above projection because of the logistics vendor switch in Q2. The presentation argues that the overage is a temporary adjustment cost that will normalize by Q4 and actually save money long term. The data supports it, but only if you model the full 18-month transition window instead of the 6-month snapshot the board usually looks at. Victoria stared at him. What? He said. You remembered all of that? You told me about it Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday last week. I listened. Something shifted in her face. The controlled composure cracked just slightly, and underneath it Ryan caught a glimpse of something that looked like gratitude so intense it bordered on grief. The particular pain of realizing that someone was paying attention to your life when you'd grown accustomed to being alone in it. Okay, she said, and her voice was rough. Okay, let me get my laptop. They worked until 3 in the morning. Victoria pulled up the raw data on her laptop while Ryan sat beside her at the card table, and what followed was the strangest and most effective collaboration either of them had ever experienced. Victoria knew the business, the strategy, the language, the political landscape of what the board needed to hear. Ryan knew systems, how to organize chaos, how to find the through line in a mess of data, how to structure information so it told a story instead of just reporting numbers. He didn't know PowerPoint. Victoria did. He didn't understand corporate finance, but he understood logic and he understood flow, and when Victoria got lost in the weeds of a particular data set, trying to reconstruct a projection she'd spent 2 weeks refining, Ryan would pull her out by asking the question that mattered. What are you trying to prove with this slide? Say it in one sentence. She'd say it. He'd nod. And suddenly the path forward was obvious. By midnight, they had the framework rebuilt. By 1 a.m., the data was populated. By 2, the projections were running. And Ryan was double-checking the math on his phone calculator because he didn't trust the spreadsheet formulas Victoria was entering at speed. This one's off, he said, pointing at a cell. You've got Q3 actuals where Q3 projected should be. Victoria squinted, scrolled, swore under her breath. How did you catch that? The number felt wrong. The number felt wrong? That's not a methodology. It is when you've spent 2 hours looking at the same data set. Your Q3 actuals are higher than projections. If the projected column shows a number higher than the actual column to the left of it, something's flipped. She fixed it. She didn't argue. Somewhere around that moment, sometime between the second pot of coffee and the third correction Ryan caught, Victoria stopped treating him like a helpful friend and started treating him like an equal. Not consciously. She probably didn't notice the shift, but Ryan did. The way she stopped explaining things he hadn't asked about. The way she started saying we instead of I. The way she'd look at him when a problem came up instinctively. The way you look at the person you trust to help you think. At 2:45 a.m., the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the building settling. The presentation framework was solid. The data was clean. Today, technically, Victoria would build the slides, and she had enough of the structure that the visual assembly would be mechanical rather than creative. The hard part was done. She leaned back in her chair, pressed her palms against her eyes, and exhaled. Ryan. Yeah. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not make it into a big deal. Okay. She dropped her hands, looked at him. Her eyes were exhausted and red and stripped of every defense she usually carried. And in the small kitchen with the sunflower tablecloth and the one broken burner, she looked more like herself than he'd ever seen her. I love you, she said. The words landed in the quiet room like something falling from a height. Not crashing, settling, finding the ground. Ryan felt them in his chest, in his stomach, in the way his hands went still on the table. Victoria. I know the timing is terrible. I know I'm sleep-deprived and emotionally wrecked, and this is probably the worst possible moment to say it. But I'm sitting in your kitchen at 3 a.m, and you just spent 5 hours rebuilding my career because you listen when I talk about spreadsheets, and if I don't say it now, I'm going to keep not saying it until it becomes the kind of thing we never say. Ryan didn't speak for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Upstairs, the dog shifted. Chloe is attached to you, he said quietly. I know. She doesn't attach easily. She learned not to. When her mother left, she was too young to remember it, but she remembers the absence. She feels it. She spent her whole life in a house where people leave, and she's learned to love carefully because of it. I know that, Ryan. So if you say this, and you mean it, you're not just saying it to me. You're saying it to her. And if you walk away later, next month, next year, whenever, you're not just walking away from me. You're walking away from a kid who already lost one person she was supposed to be able to count on. Victoria's eyes were bright now, glassy in the kitchen light, and her jaw was set in the way it got when she was fighting something. I'm not going to walk away. Everyone says that. I'm not everyone. You said that before too. And I meant it then. And I mean it now. She leaned forward and her voice dropped to something fierce and quiet. I know what you're afraid of. You're afraid I'll get bored. You're afraid I'll decide this is too small, too hard, too different from the life I'm used to. You're afraid that one day I'll look around this apartment and see the broken burner and the water stain on the ceiling and the shoes Chloe needs, and I'll think, this isn't enough. Ryan didn't deny it. But here's what you don't understand, Victoria continued. My life, the corner office, the car, the apartment with the view, none of it makes me happy. I've had all of it for years, and I've been miserable. Lonely and miserable and so tired of performing that I can barely stand to look at myself some days. And then I met you, and you fixed a light bulb in a bathroom and ate a crooked sandwich on a bench, and somehow you became the first person I felt safe with since I was 20 years old." She was crying now, not dramatically. Victoria Hayes didn't do anything dramatically unless it was intentional, but quietly, tears tracking down her face that she didn't bother to wipe. "I don't want your life because it's charming or simple or some kind of escape from mine. I want your life because you and Chloe are in it. That's the whole reason. That's all of it." The kitchen was so quiet Ryan could hear his own heartbeat. "I love you too," he said. "I've loved you for a while. I just didn't want to be wrong about it." Victoria let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for weeks. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of mascara across her wrist, and laughed, a wet, broken, relieved laugh that had no polish or composure to it at all. "Well," she said, "that's terrifying. Completely terrifying. Good. So we're both terrified." Equally. She reached across the table. He took her hand. Her fingers were cold from the late hour and the laptop keyboard and the weight of everything she'd been carrying alone. And his were rough and warm, and they sat there in the small kitchen at 3 a.m, with the presentation glowing on the screen, and the coffee gone cold, and the whole future wide open and uncertain and frightening and possible. Ryan didn't kiss her. Not that night. It didn't feel right. Not because the moment wasn't there, but because he wanted the first time to be deliberate, not desperate. He wanted it to happen when they were rested and whole, not wrecked and raw at the end of the longest night of Victoria's career. He walked her to her car at 3:30. The street was empty, the air biting cold, the kind of November night where your breath made ghosts in the dark. "Thursday," he said, "after the presentation, if it goes well." "If?" "When? When it goes well, call me. And if it goes badly, call me faster." She drove away. Ryan went back inside, checked on Chloe, asleep, mouth slightly open, nightlight casting gold across the ceiling, and sat on the couch and stared at the wall for a very long time, feeling the full weight of what he'd just admitted to another person for the first time in 6 years. He was in love. Against every instinct, every defense, every lesson he'd learned from being left behind. He was in love with a woman who lived in a different world and had every reason to eventually return to it without him. But she'd sat in his kitchen at 3 a.m. and cried and told him the truth, and the truth was messy and imperfect and terrifying, and it was the most honest thing anyone had said to him since Chloe told him his cooking was okay, but not great. The presentation went well, better than well. Victoria called him Thursday afternoon, and her voice was different, lighter, freer, like a knot had been untied somewhere inside her chest. The board loved it. The CFO said it was the clearest strategic analysis he'd seen in 5 years. The CEO asked me to present at the annual shareholder meeting. And Whitfield? A pause. He sat in the back row the entire time, didn't say a word, didn't look at me. When it was over, he left before anyone else. He knows you know. He knows I know. And he knows I rebuilt the entire thing in 36 hours, which means he knows I'm not someone he can break. Another pause. We're not someone he can break. Ryan smiled at the phone. We? You were there, Ryan. You were there when nobody else was. That presentation is yours as much as it's mine. I don't need credit. I know you don't. That's exactly why you deserve it. After the presentation, things moved fast. Not recklessly fast. Victoria and Ryan were both too careful for that, too aware of the stakes, too conscious of the small person whose heart was entangled in whatever they were building. But steadily, deliberately, like two people who'd decided to walk in the same direction and weren't going to be talked out of it. Victoria started showing up for the parts of Chloe's life that nobody showed up for. The Tuesday morning assembly where Chloe's class performed a song about seasons, and Chloe sang so loudly and so off-key that 2 parents in the front row turned around with strained smiles. Victoria sat in the back and recorded the whole thing on her phone and told Chloe afterward that she had incredible stage presence, which was technically true even if the singing was objectively terrible. She came to the parent-teacher conference, not as a girlfriend, Ryan hadn't used that word yet, And neither had she, because labels felt premature and also slightly ridiculous for two adults who'd spent the last month alternating between profound emotional confessions and arguments about whose turn it was to wash the coffee pot. She came as someone who cared, and when Ms. Patterson mentioned that Chloe's reading was slightly below grade level, Victoria asked what books they recommended and had a stack of them delivered to the apartment by Friday. She helped with homework on the night she was there, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Chloe while Ryan cooked. The two of them bent over worksheets with the same concentration, Chloe's tongue poking out the corner of her mouth the way it always did when she was focused. Victoria's brow furrowed in a way that suggested she was taking first-grade phonics as seriously as a quarterly earnings report. And on the evenings, when she couldn't come over, when work kept her late, when the demands of her position pulled her back into the orbit she'd been trying to escape, she called. Every night. She talked to Chloe first, always, listening to whatever story or complaint or scientific theory the girl had generated that day, and then she talked to Ryan, and the conversations were sometimes long and sometimes short, but always ended the same way. Good night, Ryan. Good night, Victoria. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. One evening, about 2 weeks after the presentation, Chloe was sitting on the living room floor drawing while Victoria read beside her on the couch, and Ryan washed the dishes. The apartment was quiet in the good way. Not empty quiet, but full quiet, the kind of silence that meant everyone was exactly where they wanted to be. Chloe looked up from her drawing. Victoria? Do you know how to braid hair? Victoria lowered her book. I used to. It's been a while. My dad does my braids every morning, but they always come out crooked. Don't tell him I said that. I heard that, Ryan called from the kitchen. They're crooked, Dad. It's just facts. Victoria set her book aside and moved to the floor. Chloe turned around, presenting the back of her head with the solemnity of a coronation, and Victoria began to braid. Her fingers were careful, tentative at first. It had been years since she'd done this, probably since she was a teenager doing her own hair. But the muscle memory came back, and within a few minutes she'd produced a neat, even French braid that Chloe inspected in the bathroom mirror with wide eyes. Dad, come look. Ryan came. He looked. It's straight, Chloe said, with the awe of someone who'd just witnessed something previously thought impossible. It's very straight. Victoria's better at it than you. She's better at a lot of things than me. I know. But you're better at pancakes. Victoria laughed and Ryan laughed, and Chloe looked at both of them with an expression that was complicated for a 6-year-old, happy and hopeful and scared all at once. The way you look when something good is happening and you don't quite believe it's allowed to last. Later that night, after Chloe was asleep, Ryan and Victoria sat on the couch, not talking, not needing to. The apartment was warm for once. The heating had decided to cooperate, and the gold light from Chloe's nightlight leaked through the crack in her bedroom door and made a thin line across the hallway floor. Ryan took Victoria's hand. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, and they sat there in the small apartment that smelled like dish soap and marker ink, and neither of them said it, but both of them felt it, the terrifying, impossible to fake, completely ordinary sensation of being home. The call came on a Monday, 3 weeks after the board presentation. While Ryan was replacing a faulty emergency exit light on the 16th floor, his radio crackled first. Walker, front office wants you downstairs when you're done. And he almost didn't think anything of it. The front office wanted him for things all the time. Paperwork, schedule adjustments, the occasional reminder that his uniform shirts needed to be tucked in, which he always forgot within 20 minutes. But when he walked into the facility's management office, his supervisor Dave wasn't there. Instead, a woman he'd never seen before was sitting behind Dave's desk, wearing a blazer and a visitor badge from the 38th floor, which was Executive Human Resources, the floor Ryan had only been to once during his initial onboarding 3 years ago. Ryan Walker? That's me. I'm Sandra Chen, VP of Human Resources. Do you have a few minutes? Ryan sat down in the chair across from her and immediately ran a mental inventory of everything he might have done wrong in the past month. The list was short. He was meticulous about his work, but the presence of a VP from 38 made his stomach tighten. "You're not in trouble," Sandra said, which was the exact sentence people said right before you were in trouble. "Okay. I'm here because your name came up in a conversation I wasn't expecting." She opened a folder on the desk. "Are you familiar with the quarterly strategic review that was presented to the board 3 weeks ago?" Ryan's stomach did something complicated. "I'm aware of it. The presentation was exceptional. Best the board has seen in years. Victoria Hayes delivered it, and she deserved every bit of the recognition she received." Sandra paused. But during a follow-up meeting last week, Victoria mentioned to the CEO that she hadn't rebuilt the presentation alone. She said a colleague helped her restructure the entire data framework overnight when the original file was compromised. She said this colleague demonstrated an understanding of operational systems, logistics modeling, and strategic analysis that, in her words, rivaled anyone in the C-suite. Ryan stared at Sandra Chen. "She said that?" "She did, and when the CEO asked who this colleague was, Victoria told him it was you, a maintenance technician on the facilities team." The room was very quiet. Ryan could hear the ventilation system cycling. The one on this floor had a slight rattle that he'd flagged in a work order 2 months ago. "The CEO was intrigued," Sandra continued. "He asked me to look into your file. Your performance reviews are flawless. Your supervisors describe you as the most reliable person on the team. You've submitted over 40 improvement suggestions in the past 3 years, and 17 of them have been implemented, most without credit because they were processed through your supervisor's name." She looked at him over the top of the folder. "Did you know that?" "I knew the suggestions were implemented. I didn't know whose name was on them." "Dave's, mostly, which we'll be addressing separately." She closed the folder. "Ryan, I'm here to offer you a position, Director of Building Operations. It's a new role, created specifically because the executive team realized we've been running this building with a maintenance crew when we should have been running it with an operations strategist. The job involves oversight of all building systems, vendor management, efficiency planning, and direct reporting to the COO." Ryan didn't say anything for a long time. The salary is $112,000 annually, plus benefits, plus the executive health plan that covers dependents. He still didn't say anything. "Ryan, I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out if this is real." Sandra smiled. It was a professional smile, but there was something genuine underneath it. "It's real, and frankly, you should have been identified for advancement years ago. The fact that you weren't says more about our systems than it does about your qualifications." Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. He thought about the bills on the card table, the shoes Chloe needed, the dentist appointment, the truck that needed 2 tries to start, the one broken burner, the heating that worked on an honor system. "When would I start?" 2 weeks. You'd be in the orientation program with the other new directors, office on the 14th floor. We'll provide a wardrobe stipend for the transition." She said it carefully, respectfully, the way someone said something they knew might land wrong if they weren't precise. "I need to think about it." "Of course. Take the week." He didn't need the week. He knew the answer before he left the room. But he needed time to sit with it, to turn it over, to make sure he wasn't sleepwalking through someone else's life. He called Victoria during his lunch break. She answered on the first ring, which she never did, which meant she'd been waiting. "You talked to the CEO about me," he said. "I told the truth. That's different." "Victoria, you didn't have to—" "Yes, I did. You rebuilt a board-level presentation in 5 hours at a kitchen table with a phone calculator. You caught errors in my financial models that my entire analytics team missed. You have more operational intelligence in your hands than half the people on the executive floor, and the only reason nobody knows that is because the system decided 3 years ago that you were a maintenance worker and never bothered to look again." "I am a maintenance worker." "You were. You don't have to keep being one just because that's the box someone put you in." Ryan leaned against the courtyard wall. The same courtyard, the same bench where they'd met, though it felt like a different lifetime, and pressed the phone against his ear. "I'm scared," he said. Victoria was quiet for a beat. "Of what?" "Of all of it. Of the job, the money, the change, of losing the thing that keeps me grounded. I know who I am as a maintenance worker. I know how that life works. I know the math of it. This is This is a different equation, and I don't know if I can solve it. You don't have to solve it today. I know, but I can't stop my brain from running the numbers. Then let me give you one number. Chloe's dental insurance under the executive plan covers everything. Full coverage, no copays, no out-of-pocket. Ryan closed his eyes. That was unfair. Victoria knew exactly where to hit him, and she'd hit him in the one place he couldn't argue with, so his daughter's welfare. That's a dirty move, he said. I learned from the best. Who? You. You use Chloe against me constantly. I don't use her against you. Last week you told me I had to eat the burned casserole because Chloe made it with love and refusing it would damage her self-esteem. That was legitimate parenting strategy. It was emotional blackmail, and the casserole was terrible. Ryan laughed. He laughed standing in the courtyard of the building where he'd spent 3 years being invisible, and the sound bounced off the concrete walls and startled a pigeon. I'm going to take the job, he said. I know. Don't say I know like you planned this. I didn't plan it. I just facilitated the conditions under which the inevitable could occur. That's the most CEO thing you've ever said. Thank you. He started 2 weeks later. The transition was not smooth. Ryan would be the first to admit that. He showed up on his first day in the 14th floor office wearing a new shirt from the wardrobe stipend that still had a crease from the packaging, and he sat behind a desk, a real desk, with a computer and a phone with multiple lines and a nameplate that said Ryan Walker, Director of Building Operations. And he didn't know what to do with his hands. For 3 years, his hands had been busy every minute of every shift, turning wrenches, replacing parts, carrying supplies, fixing things. Now they were supposed to type emails and hold pens during meetings and gesture at presentation slides, and the unfamiliarity of it made him feel like he was wearing someone else's skin. The first week was rough. He attended meetings where people used acronyms he didn't know and referenced software platforms he'd never touched. He sat in a conference room on the 32nd floor while a consultant gave a 2-hour presentation on operational synergy frameworks that Ryan was fairly certain contained zero actual information. He received 73 emails on his first day alone, 40 of which appeared to be people adding him to distribution lists he didn't understand. He came home that Friday evening and sat on the couch and stared at the wall. Bad week? Victoria asked. She was in the kitchen, making dinner. She'd started cooking at Ryan's apartment, not because she was good at it, but because she was determined to learn, and the results ranged from surprisingly edible to aggressively burned. Tonight appeared to be pasta, which was hard to ruin, though Victoria was testing that theory. Not bad, just different. I don't know the language yet. Everyone talks in code, and they all assume I already speak it. You'll learn it. You learn everything fast. I learned how to fix a boiler fast. Corporate culture isn't a boiler. It's exactly a boiler. A complicated system with a lot of moving parts where pressure builds up and someone has to figure out where the release valve is before the whole thing explodes. You've been doing that your whole career. The only difference is the vocabulary. Ryan looked at her. She was standing at the stove stirring sauce with the concentration of someone defusing a bomb, and she was wearing his flannel shirt, the one with the hole near the left cuff that he'd still never sewn up, over her own clothes because the apartment was cold again. When did you become an optimist? He said. I'm not an optimist. I'm a realist who happens to be dating someone smarter than he gives himself credit for. You're burning the sauce. I'm caramelizing it. It's smoking. That's flavor. It wasn't flavor. It was burned garlic. But they ate it anyway, and Chloe declared it better than last time, but still not as good as Dad's, which Victoria accepted as a compliment because she'd learned that Chloe's honesty was not cruelty. It was data. The second week was better. Ryan stopped trying to decode the corporate language and started translating it into the language he already knew. When the head of procurement showed him a vendor contract with confusing payment terms, Ryan read it the way he'd read a wiring diagram, following the logic, tracing the connections, identifying where the system was leaking money. He found 3 redundant service agreements that were costing the company $40,000 a year, and he flagged them in a memo that was 2 paragraphs long because he didn't believe in padding. The COO read the memo, called him into her office, and said, "Do that again, for everything." So he did. Week by week, methodically, Ryan went through every operational system in the building with the same attention he'd given to flickering lights and broken brackets. He found waste everywhere, overlapping contracts, inefficient scheduling, outdated equipment that was costing more in maintenance than replacement would. He wrote short, clear reports. He didn't use jargon. He didn't pad his recommendations with consultant speak. He just said what was broken and how to fix it, the same way he'd been doing for 3 years, except now people actually read it. By the end of the first month, the COO told him he'd saved the company more in operational costs than his annual salary. By the end of the second month, other directors were coming to him for advice on their own departments. By the end of the third month, the maintenance crew, his old team, had started calling him the guy who actually gets it, which was the highest compliment anyone in that building had ever given someone from the executive floor. Ryan didn't let it go to his head. He couldn't afford to. Every morning he woke up at 5:30, made Chloe's lunch, braided her hair, still crooked, though he was improving, drove her to school, and went to work. He wore the new shirts and sat behind the desk and attended the meetings, but he kept his old toolbox in the corner of his office, and when the team on 12 reported a problem they couldn't solve, he went down and fixed it himself. Because the day he forgot how to use his hands was the day he'd lost something he couldn't get back. The money changed things. Not dramatically. Ryan wasn't the kind of person who reacted to money with spending, but practically. He paid off the bills on the card table. All of them. He bought Chloe the shoes she'd needed for months, and then a second pair because she was growing so fast that redundancy seemed like good planning. He took the truck to a mechanic and got the engine fixed so it started on the first try, and the silence of that clean ignition, no second turn, no breath holding, no please start, made him sit in the parking lot for a full minute the first morning, hands on the wheel, overcome by a feeling he didn't have a word for. Relief. That was the word. The bone-deep, full-body relief of not being one emergency away from disaster. He didn't move to a bigger apartment. Not yet. Victoria suggested it once, carefully, and he'd said he wasn't ready, and she didn't push. The apartment was small and the heating was unreliable, and the stove still had one broken burner, but it was where he and Chloe had built their life, and he wasn't going to leave it until leaving felt like moving forward instead of running away. Victoria, on the other hand, made a decision about her own living situation that shocked everyone who knew her. She told him on a Sunday morning while they were at the park. Chloe was on the monkey bars, hanging upside down with the reckless confidence of a child who hadn't yet learned that falling hurt, and Victoria was sitting beside Ryan on the bench, her shoulder touching his, watching. "I'm giving up my apartment," she said. Ryan turned to look at her. "What?" "The downtown place, the one with the view. I'm not renewing the lease." "That's a $3,200 a month apartment." "I know. With the view you showed me pictures of, the one where you can see the mountains." "I know." "Why?" Victoria watched Chloe swing from bar to bar, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth the way it did when she was concentrating. "Because I spend 5 nights a week at your apartment anyway. Because the other 2 nights I'm alone in a place that's beautiful and expensive and completely empty. And I lie in bed looking at the view and thinking about the fact that Chloe asked me last week if I could braid her hair in the morning, and I wasn't there because I went home to a view that doesn't talk to me. Victoria, you can't move into my apartment. It's 800 square feet. "I know. There are 2 bedrooms and one of them is the size of a closet. I've seen it. The heating doesn't work half the time. I'll wear layers. You're a CEO. You live in a luxury apartment. You drive a car that costs more than my annual salary used to be. You can't move into a second-floor walk-up in Capitol Hill because my daughter asked you to braid her hair. I'm not doing it because she asked me to braid her hair. I'm doing it because when she asked, I realized I wanted to say yes more than I've wanted anything in years, and the only reason I couldn't was because I was sleeping in the wrong place." Ryan didn't argue anymore. He'd learned over the past few months that Victoria Hayes made decisions the way she ran her company, thoroughly, strategically, and with absolute commitment once the analysis was complete. This wasn't an impulse. She'd been thinking about it for weeks. She'd run the numbers in her head the way she ran every set of numbers, and the math had told her what Ryan's presence had been telling her for months. The life she wanted was in the small apartment with the sunflower tablecloth, not the luxury high-rise with the mountain view. She moved in on a Saturday. It took 1 carload. She'd sold most of her furniture, donated her designer kitchen appliances that she'd never learned to use properly, and reduced her possessions to what would fit in a mid-sized sedan. The look on her face when she carried the last box through the door, part relief, part terror, part something Ryan could only describe as surrender, was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and he told her so, and she told him to stop being sentimental and help her find room in the closet for her work blazers. The apartment changed after that. Not in size. It was still 800 square feet, and the sudden addition of a third person made the smallness undeniable. But in texture, Victoria's books appeared on the shelf Ryan had built, filling the empty spaces between Chloe's picture books and his collection of repair manuals. Her coat hung by the door next to Ryan's jacket and Chloe's tiny parka. Her coffee mug, the one that said, "Don't talk to me before 8 a.m., which Chloe had found hilarious and Ryan had found accurate, took its place in the cabinet next to his plain white mug and Chloe's plastic cup with the cartoon dinosaurs. The mornings became controlled chaos. 3 people, 1 bathroom, 1 working burner. Ryan cooked breakfast while Victoria braided Chloe's hair, and Chloe narrated her dreams from the night before, which were always elaborate and frequently involved the class hamster in various positions of authority. They bumped into each other in the hallway. They argued about whose turn it was to shower first. Victoria discovered that Ryan left wet towels on the bathroom floor and told him it was uncivilized, and Ryan discovered that Victoria left cabinet doors open and told her it was a safety hazard, and Chloe told both of them they were being ridiculous, and could someone please make sure her purple lunchbox was packed. It was messy. It was loud. It was the opposite of the polished, controlled, perfectly curated existence that Victoria had built for herself over a decade of professional climbing. She loved every second of it. The evenings were what sealed it. After dinner, after homework, after the nightly negotiation about bath temperature, the 3 of them would end up in the living room. Chloe on the floor with her markers and construction paper, building worlds. Victoria on the couch with her laptop, finishing the work she'd left early to come home for, occasionally reaching down to comment on Chloe's drawings with the seriousness of a gallery curator. Ryan beside her, reading or fixing something. He was always fixing something. A loose drawer handle, a squeaky hinge, the bookshelf that still leaned left, his hands busy in the way they needed to be. They didn't talk much during these evenings. They didn't need to. The apartment was full without words, full of the scratch of markers on paper, the soft click of laptop keys, the creak of Ryan's pliers, the occasional burst of Chloe narrating her latest creation to an audience of 2 who never stopped listening. Victoria's parents visited for Thanksgiving. Eleanor brought a casserole that was leagues better than anything Victoria had attempted, and Richard brought wine and a tool set for Ryan that was significantly nicer than anything he owned, wrapped with a card that said simply, "For a man who fixes things, R.H." Patricia brought a dress for Chloe that was far too expensive for a 6-year-old and perfect in every way. They ate at the card table, which was too small for 6 people, so Ryan had borrowed a folding table from Mrs. Delgado and covered both tables with the sunflower tablecloth and a white sheet, creating a mismatched dining surface that Eleanor declared charming in a tone that suggested she genuinely meant it. Chloe sat between Victoria and Eleanor, eating turkey with her hands when she thought nobody was watching, telling Patricia about the hamster's latest exploits with the confidence of a war correspondent filing a dispatch from the front lines. Richard asked Ryan about the new position, and Ryan told him about the vendor contracts and the efficiency reports, and Richard nodded in the way he'd nodded at that first dinner. The nod of a man recognizing competence. It was during dessert, pumpkin pie, store-bought, because Victoria had attempted to make one from scratch, and the results had been, in Chloe's diplomatic phrasing, interesting. That the moment happened. Chloe was reaching for a second slice when she knocked over her glass of milk. It spilled across the tablecloth, soaking the white sheet, dripping onto the floor. Chloe froze, her face cycling through the rapid emotional sequence of a child who'd made a mistake in front of important people. Shock, embarrassment, the beginning of tears. Victoria moved first. Not dramatically. She just reached over, righted the glass, dropped her own napkin on the puddle, and said, "Happens to me at least twice a week. Ask your dad about the orange juice incident." "The orange juice incident was catastrophic," Ryan said, already on his feet getting paper towels. The kitchen looked like a crime scene. It was one glass. It was a full carton. You knocked it off the counter with your elbow. The counter is too small. The counter is normal-sized. Your elbows are chaotic. Chloe's face unscrunched. The tears retreated. She looked at Victoria, then at Ryan, then at the expanding milk stain on the tablecloth, and she giggled. The specific giggle of a child who'd been caught on the edge of a meltdown and pulled back from it by people who loved her enough to make a mess feel safe. "Mom, can you pass me a napkin?" Chloe said. The table went silent. Chloe didn't notice. She was focused on the milk, reaching for the paper towels Ryan was handing her, completely unaware that she'd just detonated a word in the middle of a Thanksgiving dinner that changed the temperature of the entire room. Mom. She'd said it without thinking. The way you say words that have been forming in the back of your mind for weeks, practicing themselves in the quiet, waiting for the moment they'd slip out on their own. Victoria's hand was still holding the napkin she'd been about to pass. Her face was very still. Not frozen. Still. The kind of stillness that happens when an emotion is so large it needs a moment to find its shape before it can be expressed. Eleanor's eyes were bright. Richard was looking at his wine glass with sudden, intense interest. Patricia had stopped chewing mid-bite and was staring at Victoria with an expression that was, for the first time in Ryan's experience, completely devoid of strategic assessment. Ryan watched Victoria. He watched her process what had just happened, watched the word land in her chest and spread outward like ink in water, watched her fight the reaction that was building behind her careful composure. "Here you go, sweetie," Victoria said, and handed Chloe the napkin, and her voice was steady, perfectly steady, and only Ryan, who knew her, who'd seen her at 3 a.m. with mascara on her wrist, who'd held her hand across a card table while the future took shape, could hear the hairline fracture running through it. After dinner, after the dishes, after Eleanor had hugged everyone twice, and Richard had shaken Ryan's hand with both of his, and Patricia had kissed Chloe's forehead with uncharacteristic tenderness, after the Hayes family had driven away into the November night, Ryan put Chloe to bed. She was asleep in minutes, exhausted from the social marathon, her face peaceful against her pillow, the nightlight casting its gold glow. He found Victoria sitting on the couch in the quiet apartment, her knees pulled up to her chest, her face wet. He sat beside her. He didn't say anything. He just put his arm around her and let her lean into him, and they sat there in the small living room that smelled like pumpkin pie and spilled milk, and Victoria cried the way she almost never cried, openly, messily, without composure or control, because a 6-year-old girl with crooked braids and milk on her fingers had called her the one thing she'd never known she needed to hear. "She called me Mom," Victoria whispered. "She did. I didn't know that was going to break me." "Some things break you in the right direction." Victoria pressed her face into his shoulder. Ryan held her tighter. Outside, the November wind pushed against the windows of the small apartment, and inside, the 3 people who lived there were, for the first time, a complete and permanent family. Messy, imperfect, held together by spilled milk and terrible cooking and a sunflower tablecloth and a love that had started as a lie and become the truest thing any of them had ever known. Winter settled over Denver the way it always did. Gradually at first, a slow graying of the sky, a sharpening of the air, and then all at once, a Tuesday morning in December when Ryan opened the front door and found the world buried under 6 inches of snow that had fallen while they slept. Chloe pressed her face against the living room window and declared it the best day in the history of days, which was a title she awarded roughly twice a week, but seemed particularly justified this time. Victoria stood behind her with a coffee mug in both hands, wearing Ryan's flannel shirt over her pajamas. She'd claimed it weeks ago, and he'd stopped pretending he wanted it back, and watched the snow with the quiet expression of someone who was still getting used to seeing the world through a window that wasn't 30 stories up. Her old apartment had views of the mountains. This window looked out at a parking lot and the side of a laundromat. But Victoria had told Ryan once, late at night, that she'd never actually looked out those floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd been too busy. The view had been for other people to admire when they visited. A set piece in a life that was mostly performance. This window, the one with the parking lot and the laundromat, she looked out of every morning. The months since Thanksgiving had been good. Not perfect. Ryan didn't believe in perfect, didn't trust it, had learned from experience that perfection was just a problem that hadn't shown its face yet. But good. Substantially, measurably good. His position at the company had solidified into something he was genuinely proud of. The COO had started including him in executive strategy meetings, not as a token or an experiment, but because his input consistently changed the quality of the conversation. He had a knack for cutting through jargon and asking the question everyone else was too invested in their own expertise to see. "What's actually broken here?" he'd ask, and the room would go quiet, and then someone would say the thing they'd been avoiding for 20 minutes. Victoria's career had stabilized too, though stabilized was a generous word for what had actually been a slow, grinding battle. Marcus Whitfield had not gone quietly. In the weeks after the board presentation, he'd shifted from sabotage to politics, whispering to allies on the executive team, questioning Victoria's judgment in meetings, finding subtle ways to undermine her authority that were impossible to prove and exhausting to counter. Victoria handled it the way she handled everything, strategically, methodically, with the controlled precision of someone who'd learned early in her career that women in her position couldn't afford to look angry, only effective. But it wore on her. Ryan could see it in the evenings, the way she'd come home and sit on the couch and stare at nothing for 5 minutes before she could re-enter the world of the apartment. He didn't push her to talk about it. He'd learned that Victoria processed things internally first, running the analysis, evaluating options, and only spoke when she'd reached a conclusion worth sharing. Pushing her before that point was like asking someone to show you a painting before the paint was dry. One evening in January, she came home and didn't sit on the couch. She stood in the kitchen doorway while Ryan was making dinner, grilled cheese, Chloe's request, the Tuesday night staple, and said, "I filed a formal complaint against Marcus Whitfield today." Ryan turned off the burner. "Tell me." "I've been documenting everything, every meeting where he contradicted my data with incorrect numbers, every email where he copied the board on questions designed to make me look uninformed, every conversation where he spoke over me or took credit for my team's work. 4 months of documentation, dates, times, witnesses. That's thorough." "I'm nothing if not thorough." She sat down at the card table. Her hands were steady, but her jaw was tight. HR opened an investigation this afternoon. They pulled the server logs from the night my presentation was corrupted. The original logs, not the ones Marcus assumed were overwritten. And the data forensics team found that the file modifications originated from his workstation, his credentials, his login timestamp. The IT team had archived the raw access data before anyone thought to ask for it, and Marcus didn't know it existed. So it's not circumstantial anymore. It's a smoking gun with his fingerprints on it. Ryan set 2 grilled cheese sandwiches on plates and brought them to the table. He sat across from her and waited. "He's going to be terminated," Victoria said. "The investigation will take another 2 weeks, but Sandra Chen told me privately that the evidence is unambiguous. 12 years at the company, and he threw it away because he couldn't stand being outperformed by a woman who was younger and better at his job than he was. How do you feel?" Victoria considered the question with the seriousness she gave everything. Relieved, angry, tired, and a little sad, honestly. Sad? Because it shouldn't have taken 4 months and a formal investigation for someone to believe me. I had to build a legal case just to be taken seriously. I had to prove it beyond reasonable doubt when any man in the same position would have been believed after the first incident. Ryan didn't argue with that. He couldn't. He'd watched it happen. Not from Victoria's level, but from the maintenance floor, where the politics were different, but the dynamics were familiar. The people who did the work were rarely the people who got the credit. The people who got the credit were rarely the ones who deserved it. "You did it, though," he said. "You got the evidence. You filed the complaint. You didn't quit, and you didn't burn out, and you didn't let him win." "I almost did. All of those things, multiple times. But you didn't. Because I had somewhere to come home to." She looked at him across the table, across the sunflower tablecloth and the grilled cheese sandwiches and the everyday mess of their shared life. "That's not a small thing, Ryan, having somewhere to come home to. I didn't have that before." Chloe appeared from her bedroom holding a drawing. "Is dinner ready? Also, look at this. It's a penguin, but also a lawyer." "Why is the penguin a lawyer?" Victoria asked. "Because penguins always look like they're wearing suits, and lawyers wear suits. It's science." "That's not science. It's penguin science." Victoria took the drawing, studied it with appropriate gravity, and said, "The briefcase is a nice touch. Thank you. I added it for realism." They ate dinner. They did homework. Victoria braided Chloe's hair for school the next day. She'd mastered the French braid and was now attempting a fishtail, which Chloe had seen on a classmate and demanded with the urgency of someone requesting emergency surgery. The first attempt was lopsided. The second was better. The third was something Chloe deemed acceptable, which from her was high praise. Ryan watched them from the kitchen doorway and thought about time, about how slowly it moved when you were surviving and how quickly it moved when you were living. 5 months ago, he'd been eating a lopsided sandwich on a bench, invisible to the world. Now he was standing in a kitchen that smelled like grilled cheese and marker ink, watching two people he loved argue about hair braiding techniques, and the distance between those two moments felt both enormous and impossibly small. Marcus Whitfield was terminated in February. Victoria didn't celebrate. She came home that evening, told Ryan it was done, and then sat on the floor with Chloe and spent an hour building a blanket fort that took up the entire living room and required the structural sacrifice of every pillow in the apartment. "Is this how you process things?" Ryan asked, looking at the elaborate fabric architecture from the kitchen. "This is how I stop processing things," Victoria said from inside the fort. "Chloe, hand me the flashlight." "Which one?" "The good one." "They're both good ones." "The one that doesn't flicker." "That's the one Dad dropped in the toilet." "I didn't drop it in the toilet," Ryan called. "It fell." "Things don't fall into toilets, Dad. That's not how gravity works." "That is exactly how gravity works." "Agree to disagree," Chloe said, with the tone of a diplomat ending a summit, and handed Victoria the flashlight. Spring arrived. The snow melted. Chloe turned 7 in March, and they threw a party in the apartment that was too small for a party but perfect anyway. 7 kids from her class, Mrs. Delgado providing supervision and cookies, Victoria handling logistics with the precision of a corporate event planner, and Ryan grilling hot dogs on a portable grill he'd set up on the fire escape, which was technically not allowed but which the landlord chose to overlook because Ryan had fixed his garbage disposal for free 3 times. Chloe's birthday cake was homemade. Victoria had insisted on making it herself, despite her well-documented history of culinary disasters, and she'd spent 3 evenings practicing from a YouTube tutorial while Chloe offered unsolicited advice, and Ryan stood by with a fire extinguisher that he claimed was a joke, but was actually a precaution. The cake was lopsided. The frosting was uneven. The lettering that said, "Happy Birthday." Chloe slanted downward at a 15-degree angle, and the second L was noticeably larger than the first. It was, by any professional standard, a mess. Chloe stared at it for a long time when Victoria brought it out. 7 candles, lit and flickering, casting orange light across her face. "It's the best cake I've ever seen," she said, and she wasn't being diplomatic. She meant it with every cell in her 7-year-old body. Because the cake wasn't about the cake. It was about the person who'd made it, the hours of effort, the 3 failed practice runs, the fact that Victoria Hayes, who could afford to order a cake from any bakery in Denver, who could have had a professional confection delivered to the door, had chosen instead to stand in a kitchen with a broken burner and learn how to do it herself, for no reason other than love. Victoria's eyes were bright when Chloe blew out the candles. Ryan caught her hand under the table and squeezed it, and she squeezed back. And the apartment was full of noise and children and frosting and the particular chaos of happiness that can't be organized or optimized or controlled. It was in April, on a Thursday evening so ordinary, it didn't seem like the kind of evening where someone's life would change direction, that Ryan made the decision he'd been carrying for weeks. Chloe was asleep. Victoria was on the couch reading a book, an actual book, not a report, not a strategy document, but a novel she'd picked up at a used bookstore because the cover looked interesting. She was reading for pleasure for the first time in years, and she did it the way she did everything, with complete focus, her legs tucked under her, her glasses slightly crooked because one of the nose pads had been knocked loose when Chloe hugged her too hard, and she'd refused to get them fixed because the crookedness reminded her of the hug. Ryan sat down beside her. "I need to ask you something." Victoria looked up. She read his face the way she always read faces, quickly, accurately, with the pattern recognition skills of someone trained to assess situations in seconds. Whatever she saw made her close the book without marking her page. Okay, she said. I've been thinking about this for a while, a few months actually, and I keep trying to find the right moment, the right setting, some kind of grand gesture that matches the size of what I want to say. And I keep failing because I'm not a grand gesture person. I'm a fix things and hope they work person. So I'm just going to say it here, on the couch, on a Thursday, because this is where our life happens, and I don't want to pretend it happens somewhere fancier. Victoria's expression was very still, very careful. Very much the face of someone who was beginning to understand what was happening and was trying to control her reaction until she was certain. Victoria Hayes, you moved into my 800-square-foot apartment with a broken burner and a crooked bookshelf and a 6-year-old who critiques your cooking. You gave up a downtown penthouse for a pull-out couch and a bathroom you have to share with 2 other people. You learned how to braid hair and make birthday cakes and sit on the floor and draw terrible horses. You showed up for every school assembly and every homework session and every bedtime story and every single one of the 1,000 small, unglamorous, uncelebrated moments that make up a life with a kid. He stopped, swallowed. His hands were shaking, which annoyed him because he'd done hard things. He'd raised a child alone. He'd rebuilt his life from nothing. He'd walked into executive boardrooms in a shirt he'd bought with a wardrobe stipend. And none of those things had made his hands shake the way this did. You are the bravest person I've ever met, he said. Not because of your career or your intelligence or the way you handled Marcus Whitfield, because you chose this. You chose messy and loud and imperfect. You chose a life that looked nothing like what you'd planned. And you chose it anyway, and you chose it every day, and you never once made us feel like a compromise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was not expensive. It was not a diamond. It was a simple silver band with a small blue stone that matched the color of the sky on the October afternoon when they'd met in a courtyard over a sandwich. He'd bought it at a jewelry store on Colfax Avenue that specialized in custom pieces, and the jeweler had asked who it was for, and Ryan had tried to explain and ended up telling the entire story, from the bench to the fake dinner to the terrible horses. And the jeweler had listened to every word and then charged him half price because, he said, some stories deserve a discount. Will you marry me? Ryan said. Victoria looked at the ring. She looked at Ryan. She opened her mouth and closed it again, which was the first time in his entire experience of knowing her that Victoria Hayes had been at a loss for words. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. That's Chloe's word. She's influenced my vocabulary. Among other things. Victoria's voice cracked, and she pressed her lips together, fighting the emotion that was breaking through her composure the way it always eventually did. Not explosively, but quietly, like water finding the cracks in a wall. Ryan. Yeah? I need you to know that I'm not saying yes because the moment is right or because you gave a beautiful speech, although it was, and you did. I'm saying yes because 8 months ago I was a lonely, exhausted woman who'd forgotten what it felt like to be a person instead of a performance, and you and Chloe reminded me. You didn't rescue me. You didn't fix me. You just made room for me in your life, and the room was exactly the right shape. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. Not perfectly. It was slightly loose because he'd guessed at the size based on a ring she'd left on the bathroom sink, and the guessing had been imprecise. But it fit well enough to stay on, and Victoria looked at it on her hand and laughed, the wet, broken, honest laugh that Ryan had heard for the first time in his kitchen at 3 a.m. over a reconstructed presentation, the laugh that meant her defenses were completely down and she didn't care. We have to tell Chloe, she said, in the morning. She'll want to be involved in every detail, and it's going to be a whole production. She's going to want to plan the wedding. She's going to want to officiate the wedding. Can 7-year-olds do that? She'll find a way. They sat on the couch in the quiet apartment with the ring that was slightly too loose and the book that had lost its page and the leftover dishes in the sink that neither of them was going to wash tonight, and they held each other in the ordinary, uncinematic way that real love actually looks. Not a movie kiss in the rain, but 2 tired people on a second-hand couch at 10 p.m. on a Thursday, choosing each other again. In the morning, they told Chloe. Ryan sat her down at the kitchen table, the card table, the same one where they'd eaten 1,000 dinners, where he'd calculated bills by pencil, where Victoria had rebuilt a career presentation at 3 a.m., and said, Bug, Victoria and I have something to tell you. Chloe looked at both of them with the expression of a child conducting a rapid threat assessment. Am I in trouble? No. Nobody's in trouble. Are we moving? No. Is the hamster dead? What? No. Why would the hamster be? Because you both look serious. And serious usually means something bad happened, and the hamster has been looking suspicious lately. The hamster's fine, Chloe. Then what? Ryan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Ryan. He nodded. I asked Victoria to marry me last night, Ryan said, and she said yes. Chloe was silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then she shot out of her chair with a velocity that defied the laws of physics for a 48-pound human being and launched herself at both of them simultaneously, one arm around Ryan's neck and one arm around Victoria's, hanging between them like a small, ecstatic bridge. I knew it, she screamed. I knew it! I knew it! I knew it! You did not know it. I told Marcus at school last week that you guys were going to get married, and he said you weren't, and I said, watch me be right, and I was right. You told Marcus. I told everyone. I've been manifesting. Where did you learn the word manifesting? Ms. Patterson. Ms. Patterson teaches manifestation? Ms. Patterson teaches everything. She's very advanced. Chloe pulled back, her face flushed, her eyes electric, and looked at them with the seriousness that she reserved for her most important pronouncements. I have conditions. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Conditions. First, I want to be in the wedding, not just attending, in it, with a role. Done. Second, Victoria has to make the cake. Victoria blinked. Chloe, my cakes are perfect. Your cakes are perfect because you make them, and that's what matters. Victoria's hand went to her mouth. Third, Chloe drew herself up to her full height, which was not substantial, but was delivered with the gravitas of a Supreme Court justice. I get to call you Mom. Not sometimes by accident. For real. Every day. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The dog upstairs shifted. Outside, Denver was waking up. The April sun hitting the parking lot, and the laundromat, and the small window of a second-floor apartment where 3 people stood in a kitchen with a sunflower tablecloth and 1 broken burner, and the silence was so full it could have filled a stadium. Victoria knelt down. Not the way adults knelt to get on a child's level, the way a person knelt when something had brought them to their knees. You can call me Mom, she said, for real, every day, for the rest of my life. Chloe nodded, satisfied, as though this had been the expected outcome of a negotiation she'd been planning for months. Then her face softened, the executive composure dropping away, and she was just a 7-year-old girl who'd been waiting a long time for someone to stay. Hi, Mom, she said. Hi, baby. Ryan stood in his kitchen and watched his daughter and the woman he loved hold each other, and he let himself feel it, all of it, every ounce of it, the terror and the gratitude and the impossible, unreasonable, completely irrational hope that this was going to last, that this wasn't going to be taken away, that the universe, which had dealt him a lousy hand in most respects, had somehow slipped him an ace when he wasn't looking. The wedding was in June. They held it at the park on 8th Avenue, the one with the swings, the one where Victoria had shown up at 9:45 on that first Saturday with coffee and sneakers she'd never worn before. Ryan had suggested it half-jokingly, expecting Victoria to want something more formal, more befitting her status. But she'd said yes immediately, without hesitation, because the park was where they'd become a family, and that mattered more than venue aesthetics. It was small. 30 people. Victoria's parents, Aunt Patricia, Mrs. Delgado, a handful of colleagues from both their floors, a few parents from Chloe's school who'd become friends through the slow accumulation of play dates and birthday parties and carpool exchanges. The officiant was a retired judge who was a friend of Richard's and who kept the ceremony short because, as he told them beforehand, the good marriages don't need long ceremonies, and the long ceremonies don't save the bad marriages. Victoria wore a white dress that she'd bought off a rack at a department store. Not because she couldn't afford something custom, but because she'd tried on dozens of expensive designer options and felt like a costume in every one of them. The department store dress was simple, fitted, and when she looked at herself in the dressing room mirror, she'd felt like herself. That was the only criterion that mattered, Ryan wore a navy suit that he'd bought with his own money, not the wardrobe stipend, his own, because he wanted to own this moment completely, every thread of it. The suit fit well, not perfectly. The jacket was slightly tight across the shoulders, the same way every jacket was, because his body had been shaped by years of physical work and would always be more comfortable in a flannel shirt than a blazer. But he looked good. He looked like a man who'd built something worth standing up for. Chloe walked beside them both during the ceremony. Not behind, not in front, beside. She wore a yellow dress. She'd chosen it herself because yellow was the color of sunflowers, and sunflowers were the tablecloth, and the tablecloth was the first thing that had ever made their kitchen feel like home. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that she'd picked from the field behind the playground that morning, slightly wilted already, perfect. The vows were simple. Ryan spoke first, and he didn't read from a paper because he wasn't good at reading things he'd written. The words always sounded different out loud than they did in his head, and he didn't want to perform. He wanted to speak. "I spent most of my life being invisible," he said, not in a sad way, just in a factual way. "I was the guy who fixed things nobody noticed were broken, and I was okay with that because I had Chloe and she noticed me, and that was enough." He paused. "And then you sat on a bench and asked a total stranger to pretend to be your boyfriend, which, for the record, is still the most ridiculous thing that's ever happened to me." Laughter from the small crowd. Victoria pressed her lips together, fighting a smile. "You didn't see a maintenance worker that day. You saw a person. And not because you were trying to be generous or open-minded or any of the things people say when they're congratulating themselves for not being snobs. You saw me because you were desperate and lonely and tired of pretending, and in that moment, you needed someone real. And I was there. That's all it was. Timing and honesty and a really bad sandwich." He looked at her. Her eyes were bright, her jaw set in the way it got when she was containing something large. "I'm not going to promise you a perfect life," he said. "I can't promise the heating will work, or that Chloe won't critique your cooking, or that I'll ever learn to close cabinet doors. But I can promise you that I will notice you every day, the way you noticed me when nobody else did. That's the thing I can give you that nobody else can. Not money, not status, not a corner office with a view, just attention, just presence, just the certainty that someone is paying attention to your life." Victoria spoke next, and she did read from a paper, because she was someone who organized her thoughts best in writing, and she wasn't going to apologize for that. "I grew up in a family that measured success in achievements," she said. "Degrees, titles, revenue, rankings. I internalized that completely. I spent my 20s building a career that looked impressive from the outside and felt hollow from the inside, and I told myself the hollowness was just the cost of ambition, that everyone at the top felt this way, that loneliness was the tax you paid for competence." She looked at Ryan, then at Chloe, then back at Ryan. "And then I met a man who knew how to fix everything except his own loneliness, and a girl who drew pictures of hamster armies and called my cooking interesting, and I discovered that the thing I'd been working toward my entire life, the corner office, the title, the respect of people who only valued me for what I produced, none of it compared to the feeling of being needed, not professionally, not strategically, just humanly. Being needed by two people who didn't care about my resume or my portfolio or my quarterly projections, who just wanted me to show up, to stay, to be there in the morning." Her voice wavered, and she let it. She didn't fight it or control it or redirect it. She let the crack show because the crack was honest, and honesty was the foundation everything else was built on. "I'm not the person I was 8 months ago," she said. "I'm messier. I'm less polished. I burn things. I can't braid hair as well as I thought I could, and my cakes look like they survived a natural disaster, but I'm happier than I've ever been. Not because my life got smaller, because it got fuller, because there's a difference between a life that looks full and a life that feels full, and I didn't know that difference until I found you." The judge pronounced them married. Ryan kissed Victoria, and it was not a movie kiss. It was slightly off-center, and he bumped her nose, and Chloe was pulling on both their hands. And it was exactly right. The reception was a picnic. Blankets on the grass, food from a local restaurant that Ryan had picked because they made the best green chile in Denver, a sheet cake from the grocery store because Victoria's homemade version was reserved for Chloe's birthdays, and Chloe had made it clear that this tradition was non-negotiable. Music from a portable speaker, Dancing, that was terrible. Richard Hayes, retired attorney, dignified patriarch, did the Macarena with Chloe and was photographed doing so from 17 different angles by an ecstatic Eleanor. Patricia pulled Ryan aside during a quiet moment, holding a glass of champagne with the careful precision of a woman who'd had exactly 2 glasses and was considering a strategic third. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For what?" "For underestimating you. At that first dinner, I looked at you and I saw what people in my world usually see when they look at someone in your position. A maintenance worker. A limitation, which says everything about me and nothing about you." She took a sip. "My niece was drowning, Ryan. She'd been drowning for years in work and expectations and the crushing loneliness of being excellent at everything except being happy. And you pulled her out, not because you were trying to be a hero, but because you saw someone struggling and you couldn't not help. That's not a common quality. In my experience, it's the rarest quality there is. I didn't save her. She saved herself. You gave her a reason to." Chloe gave her a reason to. Patricia smiled. It was a real smile, not a strategic one, and Ryan realized it might have been the first fully genuine smile she'd given him. "You're going to attribute every good thing in your life to your daughter, aren't you?" "She's the reason for most of them." "Including Victoria?" Ryan looked across the park to where Victoria was sitting on a blanket with Chloe, both of them laughing at something. Chloe's wildflower bouquet tucked behind her ear, Victoria's white dress grass-stained at the hem, because she'd been sitting on the ground for an hour and didn't care. The late afternoon sun was hitting them both, gold and warm, and they looked like they belonged together. Not in a staged, photogenic way, but in the deep structural way that family belonged together. Like they'd been built for the same house. "Especially Victoria," he said. The party wound down as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that no one in the group was sober or composed enough to appreciate properly, except Chloe, who stood at the edge of the playground and stared at it with her mouth open and said, "That's the best sky I've ever seen," which was the 3rd time she'd used the word best that day, and every time she'd meant it. Mrs. Delgado hugged Ryan so hard he felt his spine adjust. "Your mother would be proud," she whispered, and Ryan nodded because he couldn't speak, and that was okay. Some things were allowed to be felt without being said. They drove home in the truck, the one that started on the first try now, the one with the dent in the rear fender that Ryan had decided to keep because it was part of the story. Chloe fell asleep in her booster seat within 4 minutes, her wildflower bouquet crushed against her chest, her face slack with the absolute exhaustion of a 7-year-old who'd had the greatest day of her life and didn't have the energy to stay conscious for the drive home. Victoria sat in the passenger seat with her shoes off and her feet on the dashboard, something she'd never done in her own car but did in Ryan's truck every time, a small rebellion against the years of rigid propriety that had defined her before, and looked out the window at the Denver skyline, the lights of the city spreading across the darkening plain like something scattered by a careless hand. "Ryan." "Yeah." "Are you happy?" He thought about it. Not because the answer was uncertain, but because the question deserved more than a reflexive yes. He thought about the man he'd been a year ago, the one who ate lunch alone on a bench and drove a truck that needed 2 tries and calculated his life in margins so thin they could be wiped out by a single unexpected expense. He thought about the pile of bills on the card table, which was gone now. He thought about the shoes Chloe had needed, which she had now, 2 pairs. He thought about the flickering lights and the broken brackets and the 3 years of being invisible in a building full of people who looked right through him. And he thought about this: the truck, the sleeping child, the woman beside him with grass stains on her dress and a ring on her finger that was still slightly too loose. "Yeah," he said, "I'm happy." "Me too." "Even with the broken burner?" "Especially with the broken burner. I've developed an emotional attachment to it. If you fix it, I'll be upset." "It's been broken for 4 years." "Then it's a tradition." He laughed. She laughed. And the truck rolled through the Denver night carrying a family home, a real family, the kind that wasn't assembled from perfection, but from persistence, from showing up and staying and choosing each other through the messy, unglamorous, beautiful tedium of daily life. Here is what I know about love after telling this story. It doesn't arrive the way the movies promise. There's no soundtrack. There's no perfect lighting. There's no moment where two people lock eyes across a crowded room and the rest of the world dissolves. That's fiction. Beautiful fiction, but fiction. Real love arrives in a courtyard over a bad sandwich. It arrives in the form of a desperate request from a stranger who needs a favor. It arrives in crooked braids and terrible horse drawings, and a birthday cake that leans 15 degrees to the left. It arrives in the willingness to sit at a card table at 3 in the morning, helping someone rebuild something broken. Not because you'll get anything out of it, but because you can't watch someone struggle alone. Ryan Walker spent 32 years being invisible. He was the guy nobody noticed, doing work nobody valued, living a life nobody envied. And if you'd asked him, before that October afternoon on the bench, whether he believed things could change, really, fundamentally, permanently change, he would have said no. Not out of bitterness, out of experience. His experience had taught him that the world sorted people into categories early and rarely bothered to reshuffle the deck. But the world shuffled anyway. Not because Ryan got lucky, though luck played its part. Not because Victoria saved him, though her belief in his ability opened doors he'd stopped knocking on. The world shuffled because Ryan Walker possessed something that no job title or salary or corner office could provide. He was kind. Instinctively, structurally, irreducibly kind. He noticed broken things and fixed them. He noticed struggling people and helped them. He noticed a lonely woman on a bench and treated her like a human being instead of a name on a parking spot. And that single act of basic decency set in motion a chain of events that rebuilt 3 lives from the ground up. That's not a fairy tale. That's just what happens when a good person refuses to become a bitter one. Chloe Walker, 7 years old, daughter of a former maintenance worker and a CEO, stepdaughter of a woman who chose a broken burner over a mountain view, grew up in an apartment in Capitol Hill that was too small and too loud and too warm in summer and too cold in winter. She grew up with drawings on the fridge and a crooked bookshelf and a purple lunchbox that was packed every night by one of 2 parents who loved her with the fierce, imperfect, endlessly patient love of people who knew what it meant to almost not have this. She grew up knowing she was wanted, not because anyone told her, though they did, often in ways both grand and mundane, but because the evidence was everywhere, in the braids that got straighter over time, in the birthday cakes that got slightly less lopsided each year, in the 22-minute car rides that became 30-minute car rides when Victoria joined them because 3 people had more to talk about than 2, and the stories got longer, and the laughter got louder, and the truck that used to feel just big enough for a father and daughter now felt just big enough for a family. The fake relationship that began as a desperate lie in a concrete courtyard became the most honest thing any of them had ever built. Not because it was perfect, because it was real. Messy, complicated, held together by spilled milk and stubborn love and the daily decision to keep showing up even when showing up was hard. And in the end, that's all a family is. Not a structure, not an institution, not a set of conditions that must be met before the label applies. A family is just the people who keep showing up, who notice the broken things and fix them, who sit on the floor and draw terrible pictures and eat burned casseroles and argue about whose turn it was to shower first, who choose each other, deliberately, imperfectly, every single day. Ryan chose, Victoria chose, Chloe chose, and the life they built from those choices, small, loud, imperfect, and permanent, was more than any of them had ever dared to hope for. Which, when you think about it, is exactly the point.